So there are actually hundreds of tiny details hidden inside Elden Ring that most players walk right past. And in this video, I'm going to walk you through 999 of them, one by one, in a way that's calm, detailed, and easy to just sit back and listen to. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. I put this video together over several months of in-game exploration, item description reading, and cross-referencing community discoveries. I made a deliberate choice to avoid deep lore debates and instead focus on the observational stuff, the things you can actually see or notice in the game. The small visual details, the weird dialogue lines, the hidden rooms, the item placements that seem too specific to be accidental. I left out a lot of the heavier speculative lore because I wanted this to feel more like a walk through the world and less like a lecture. I also chose to reorder some discoveries thematically rather than by location, so things flow a little more naturally from one to the next. Alright, let's get into it. The first thing worth pointing out is that the tutorial cave in Elden Ring, the one called the Cave of Knowledge, is actually optional. You can walk right past it and enter the lands between without ever learning the basic controls. From Software, made the decision to hide the entrance slightly and make it feel like a natural path rather than a mandatory stop, which is very on brand for them. In that same cave, there is a message on the ground that reads, "Try fingers, butthole." This became one of the most famous memes in gaming history almost immediately after the game launched. But what many people do not realize is that this message is placed just before a foggy passageway, so it is technically giving you actual gameplay advice about the hole in the fog wall. The starting keepsake items in character creation are not just flavor. Some of them have lore connections that go quite deep. The golden seed, for example, connects to the Erd tree's cycle of growth and renewal, and choosing it at the start subtly tells you something about the world you are entering before you have seen any of it. There is a dog in the game that appears to be sleeping near the gatefront ruins. It does not attack you, it just sleeps. This is extremely unusual for an Elden Ring enemy in that area, and many players initially walk past it thinking it is dead, only to realize later it is still breathing. The Crucible Knights, those big armored enemies with tails and wings, are described in item lore as being ancient warriors who carry the original aspects of the Erd tree from before it was fully formed. This means the tail they have is not a mutation or a curse. It is actually the original form of life in the lands between, something that was later shed as the Erd tree grew more dominant. If you look closely at the armor of Godric the Grafted, you can see that it includes pieces of what appear to be many different armors stitched together, which mirrors his whole motif of grafting body parts onto himself. His armor is itself a kind of graft. Godric's Great Rune, when its description is read carefully, suggests that he is the most distant descendant of Marika, and yet he considers himself the most worthy of the Elden Ring. The distance between his self-image and his actual position in the bloodline is one of the sadder character details in the game. The bridge leading to Stormvale Castle has a ballista on it that fires enormous bolts. Those bolts can kill you instantly at almost any point in the game, but if you look at the trajectory of the ballista, it is actually aimed at something specific in the distance. Several players have noted that the angle points roughly toward the Erd tree. Inside Stormvale Castle, there is a room full of ravens perched on rafters. Ravens in the lands between are generally associated with death and carrion, but these specific ravens are not hostile. They are just watching. It is one of those details that makes the castle feel genuinely inhabited rather than like a game level. There is a corpse inside Stormvale that is slumped in a chair and is wearing what appears to be a banquet outfit. This suggests that at some point in the castle's history, there were feasts and gatherings, which makes the current ruined state of the place feel much more tragic. The grafted scion that kills you in the opening cinematic can actually be defeated. If you manage to kill it before dying, you receive 2 items and the game continues as normal. The items have lore descriptions that suggest the grafted scion was once a person, or possibly multiple people, before being combined. Margit the Fellowman, the first main boss most players encounter, is later revealed through item descriptions to be a disguised form of Morgoth, who is actually a demigod and a son of Marika. Margit is essentially a costume that Morgoth wears to test or deter Tarnished before they reach Godric. The cane he carries in his human-like hand is not a weapon, it is a prop. When you defeat Margit and watch his death animation, he falls in a way that suggests his body is extremely heavy, far heavier than his appearance would indicate. This lines up with the lore that Omen, like Morgoth, have large, monstrous bodies beneath their cloaks. The name Margit itself is an old Scandinavian name meaning pearl, which is a stark contrast to the violent and imposing figure that bears it. From Software occasionally gives characters names from real-world languages that carry ironic or thematic weight. The rain in Limgrave follows a realistic atmospheric cycle. It does not rain constantly, and if you stand in an area long enough between rain periods, you will notice the ground textures actually change slightly to reflect moisture levels. This level of environmental detail was noted by a number of players who spent time just standing still and observing the world. Patches, the recurring character from multiple From Software games, returns in Elden Ring and is found in a cave called Murkwater Cave. He tricks you in the exact same way he has tricked players in Dark Souls, Demon Souls, and Bloodborne. He locks you in a room, pretends to threaten you, then apologizes and offers to sell you things. The script he follows is almost word for word the same across games. Patches has a line of dialogue after you forgive him, where he mutters something about how he keeps doing this and cannot help himself. It reads as almost self-aware, as though he knows he is following a pattern. Many players interpret this as From Software quietly acknowledging that they keep reusing this character and joke. The item Patches sells you, after his introduction, includes a stone sword key, which is an item that unlocks impenetrable fog gates. The irony is that the most useful item he sells you is one that lets you access hidden areas, which is something Patches himself would probably gate behind another trap if he could. There is a line in Patches' quest line where he admits he became a thief and trickster because it was the only way he knew how to survive. This one line gives him more depth than most characters in the game get across their entire quest lines. The ghost glovewort flowers that you find growing near ghostly grave sites are used to upgrade spirit ashes. Their description says they grow where spirits linger, but what is interesting is that they appear in places that have no obvious connection to death or graves, suggesting that spirits are present in areas of the game that have no other indication of haunting. Spirit ashes, in general, are a fascinating mechanic because the description of the item implies that the spirit inside does not fully understand what is happening to them. They are summoned to fight, but they experienced their original death and now exist in a kind of permanent loop. The jellyfish spirit ash, which summons a large floating jellyfish to fight alongside you, has a description that says the jellyfish searches endlessly for its owner. When you summon it, it is not fighting for you. It is just looking for someone it lost. It attacks enemies as a kind of residual behavior, not out of loyalty. Roderica, the character who eventually becomes a spirit tuner and upgrades your spirit ashes, mentions in early dialogue that she can hear the spirits crying. This is not metaphorical. She is describing a genuine sensitivity to spiritual presence that is later confirmed by her unique ability to communicate with and strengthen spirits. When Roderica first arrives at the Round Table Hold, she sits by a fireplace and does almost nothing. If you return multiple times over many hours of gameplay, she very slowly starts to look more comfortable, less hunched, less withdrawn. It is a tiny animation change, but it tracks her emotional recovery over the course of your journey. The Round Table Hold itself exists outside of the normal world. This is confirmed by the fact that you cannot access it through normal travel and must be transported there by Malenia. But the Hold's doors and windows show a darkness outside that is different from any location in the game, suggesting it occupies some kind of space between realms. There is a painting inside the Round Table Hold that depicts a scene from the game world. Players have tracked down the actual location depicted in the painting and found it to be a specific hilltop in Liurnia of the Lakes. The angle of the painting matches the view from that hill almost exactly. The two fingers who reside in a sealed room in the Round Table Hold are never fully explained. They communicate through the finger reader Enya, who translates their gestures. What is strange is that the two fingers occasionally move on their own when you are not looking at them. If you watch them for a long time without triggering dialogue, there are small twitches and shifts in their position. The Elden Ring's great runes, once shattered, are described as having lost their original meaning. The shards held by the demigods are not the same as the original rune fragments. They have been changed by the act of holding them, shaped by the desire and nature of whoever possesses them. This suggests that the runes are almost alive, responsive to intention. Malenia's great rune is described as never having been mended. This means that even in the period before the shattering, when the Elden Ring was still whole, her rune existed as a kind of wound. It is not that the shattering broke her rune. Her rune was already broken, or more accurately, it was never fully formed. The rot that Malenia carries is called the Scarlet Rot, and it is connected to a goddess named Rot, who predates the Erd Tree's dominance. Item descriptions suggest that the rot is not just a disease. It is an alternative form of life, one that the Erd Tree's order suppressed, but never eliminated. When Malenia bloomed for the first time during the battle against Radahn, she released a wave of scarlet rot that turned the entire region of Caelid into a blighted wasteland. But if you look at Caelid before the rot and compare it to after, based on environmental and geological details, it is possible to reconstruct what the landscape once looked like. It was apparently a lush and temperate area. Radahn himself stopped the stars with his gravity magic, and this is described as a choice he made to protect someone. The person he was protecting was Noxtella, a hidden underground city whose people believed the stars controlled fate and destiny. By stopping the stars, Radahn was essentially putting fate on hold for them. The fact that Radahn is a great magic user is not obvious from his appearance, because he looks like a pure warrior, but his armor includes astrological symbols and constellation maps. It is only when you read item descriptions that you learn he studied gravity magic under a Celian sorcerer. Radahn's horse is named Leonard. Radahn is massive, far too large for a normal horse to carry, so he used his gravity magic to make himself lighter, so that Leonard would not have to strain under his weight. This detail is in the item description for the horse, and is one of the most quietly emotional facts in the entire game. Leonard is still alive when you fight Radahn. He is visible during the boss fight, carrying the rotted and maddened Radahn into battle. He has been doing this for years at this point, stuck in Caelid, never leaving his rider's side. The Radahn festival that you trigger in order to fight him is staged as a celebration. Warriors from across the lands between come to test themselves against him. But in the lore, it is also understood as a mercy killing. Radahn has lost his mind to the rot, and everyone knows it. The festival is a way to give him a worthy death. After you defeat Radahn, a brief cutscene shows a meteor striking the earth. This meteor contains something that was being held in place by Radahn's gravity magic. The something is later revealed to be connected to another major character, and the crater it leaves behind is a location you can visit. The crater is in the Mistwood area of Limgrave, and it is very easy to miss because the game does not draw attention to it. It is simply a hole in the ground with some specific items nearby. Players who found it before understanding its significance reported it as just a strange geographic feature. In the Mistwood itself, before the crater forms, there is a howling sound that comes from within the forest. You can hear it as soon as you enter Limgrave, if you go in the right direction. The source of the howling is Blade, a half-wolf companion to the character Ranni. He is searching for someone and calling out across the forest. Blade's design includes a shadow motif. He is described as Ranni's shadow, which in the lore means he was created to serve and protect her, but he develops genuine feelings and loyalties that go beyond his original purpose. The tragedy of his character is that his purpose eventually overrides his personality. Ranni the Witch is one of the most elaborately plotted characters in Elden Ring. Her questline spans multiple regions, involves multiple characters, and culminates in one of the game's possible endings, but she introduces herself under a false name initially, calling herself Renna, and it is only later that she reveals she is Ranni. Ranni's doll body, the small blue figure she inhabits, is not her original body. She abandoned her original body as part of a ritual that killed her flesh and freed her soul. The doll was prepared in advance, which means she planned all of this very carefully and for a very long time. The four characters who serve Ranni's questline, Blade, Iji, Saluvis, and Selen, each have their own parallel quest lines that eventually intersect. What is unusual is that each of them is loyal to Ranni in a different way, and each of them ultimately comes to a different fate. It is as though the game is exploring what different kinds of loyalty lead to. Saluvis, the sorcerer in Ranni's service, is secretly conducting experiments involving puppet making. He creates mind-controlled servants from living people, which is something Ranni does not know about, or at least does not appear to know about. His hidden puppet-making chamber is one of the most disturbing optional discoveries in the game. One of the puppets Saluvis has created, or is attempting to create, is Nephili Lux, a warrior you meet early in the game. He gives you a potion that is meant to turn her into a puppet and asks you to give it to her. You can choose not to. If you do give it to her, she becomes a puppet. If you do not, her questline continues normally. Nephili Lux is later revealed to be an adoptive daughter of Gostok, the gatekeeper of Stormvale Castle, which itself is a strange and understated revelation. More importantly, she is also the adoptive daughter of Hoara Lux, who is revealed to be the real identity of Godfrey, the first Elden Lord. Godfrey's story is told in pieces across the game. He was once the greatest warrior of the lands between, chosen by Queen Marika as her first husband and first Elden Lord. But when he had grown strong enough through battle, the grace that had guided him was taken from him, and he and his warriors were exiled from the lands between. This exile was apparently intentional on Marika's part. She needed warriors who would grow stronger beyond the edges of the known world, who would eventually return, and who would do something. What exactly that something is depends on which interpretation you accept, but the deliberateness of the exile is well supported by item lore. The Tarnished, meaning the player character, is one of many exiled warriors called back by Grace after the Shattering. The game does not explain why Grace returned to the Tarnished specifically. It is one of the game's central ambiguities. There is a site of Grace, just outside the first step, the spawn point at the beginning of the game. If you touch it, a small golden wisp appears and moves in a specific direction. This is the game's way of showing you a suggested path, but that wisp is narratively described as a finger of grace guiding the Tarnished. It is not a UI element, it is a lore phenomenon. The map of the lands between is found in fragments across the world. Each fragment reveals a portion of the map and is described as having been produced by a cartographer. There is a quest related to one specific cartographer named Ensha, who is found at the Round Table Hold. He never speaks and eventually attacks you. His item description offers a possible reading of why. There are messages throughout the game, many of them written by other players online, but there are also messages that appear to be written by the game itself, placed in locations that match their content too precisely to be coincidental. From Software has confirmed that some in-world messages are hand-placed by developers. One such developer message in the Stranded Graveyard reads, "Ahead, vile beasts, but weakness, feet." This is genuinely useful advice for the nearby enemies, but is written in the fragmented style of player messages, making it indistinguishable at first glance. It is a developer winking at the player. The Elden Ring, the object the game is named after, is never shown in its complete form anywhere in the game. You see pieces of it, depictions of it in art, and the finger ruins that once held it. But the actual ring as a whole does not appear until a specific late-game moment, and even then only briefly. The Erd tree is visible from almost everywhere in the game. It is an environmental constant, always present in the background, but the direction it appears from changes depending on where you are, which makes sense geographically. Some players spent time verifying that its apparent position on the horizon is geometrically accurate, to its actual location in the game world. The inside of the Erd tree is not shown until very late in the game. When you finally enter it, it is not the golden paradise implied by the visual design of the exterior. The inside is full of ash and burned remains, suggesting that something went deeply wrong inside long before the player arrives. There is a room inside the Erd Tree Sanctuary area that contains a chair with an impression in it, as though someone sat in it for a very long time. No character is present. The chair is oriented toward a window that looks out at the Erd Tree's interior branches. Whoever sat there was watching the tree from the inside. Queen Marika the Eternal is the central figure in Elden Ring's lore, and is almost never seen. She appears in the opening cinematic, in late-game scenes, and in item descriptions, but her actual presence in the game world is almost entirely through traces, ruins, and the stories of others. Marika's imprisonment within the Erd Tree is described in item lore as a kind of punishment. She shattered the Elden Ring deliberately, which was an act of defiance against the greater will, the entity that the Erd Tree represents. Why she did it is never fully stated, but several possible readings are supported by the lore. One possible reading is that she did it as an act of grief, specifically grief over the death of her son Godwyn the Golden, who was killed in an event called the Night of the Black Knives. Another reading is that it was a deliberate political act designed to dismantle the system that the Greater Will had imposed on the lands between. The Night of the Black Knives is one of the most referenced events in the game, and one of the least shown. It happened before the events of the game, in the past, and is described only through item descriptions, environmental details, and dialogue fragments. Assassins using knives made from a fragment of the Rune of Death killed Godwyn. Godwyn the Golden was not only killed in terms of his soul, but also in terms of his body, or rather the opposite. His soul was killed while his body remained alive, which created something called a Death Prince. His body is buried somewhere in the earth beneath the lands between, and it is still alive in a wrong and terrible way. The Prince of Death's presence seeps up through the ground in certain areas, creating pools of decay and masses of deathroot, which are described as growths that emerge from Godwyn's slowly spreading body. The deathbird enemies that spawn at night are connected to this phenomenon. Deathbirds appear only at night in specific locations. They are large, crow-like creatures with a burning lantern motif. They are connected to a death-related faith tradition called the Erd Tree's antithesis, which venerates death rather than the Golden Order's rejection of it. D, Hunter of the Dead, is a character who hunts deathbirds and similar entities. He is one of the characters who has a personal connection to the Night of the Black Knives and to Godwyn. His twin brother, also named D, is found imprisoned later in the game, and the interaction between the two of them is one of the most understated emotional beats in the entire story. The twin brothers are nearly identical in appearance, but have taken completely different paths. One became a defender of the Golden Order. The other was used by Fear, the deathbed companion, who harboured the piece of the Rune of Death that was used in the original assassination. Fear is one of the stranger characters in Elden Ring. She invites you to be embraced by her when you arrive at the Round Table Hold, and this embrace causes a minor debuff to your maximum health. Most players remove this effect immediately, but keeping it and talking to her leads to an increasingly elaborate questline. Fear's purpose is to give a proper burial to Godwyn, and by doing so, to create a new age of death that she believes will be more just than the Golden Order. Whether this is noble or destructive, the game offers no clear answer. The item she eventually gives you, the Mending Rune of the Death Prince, is one of the items that can be used to mend the Elden Ring at the end of the game, resulting in one of the possible endings. The ending is deliberately ambiguous about whether it is good. Fear's embrace also serves as a moment of physical comfort in a world that is almost entirely cold and violent. Several players have written about choosing to stay in her embrace just because the game is so relentlessly harsh, and it is one of the few genuinely warm moments. This appears to have been intentional. The Round Table Hold has a hidden area below it that you fall into through a specific mechanism. This lower area is called the Volcano Manor in a roundabout narrative sense. Or more precisely, it connects thematically to a secret beneath the hold. What you find there is disturbing enough that several players considered it the most unsettling discovery in the game. What you find is an enormous, pale, fleshy mass embedded in the foundation of the hold. It is described in nearby item lore as a two fingers that has died or been killed. The hold is apparently built around or above the remains of a deceased divine entity. The implication is that the Round Table Hold, which presents itself as a neutral safe space for Tarnished, is in some way maintained by or connected to a dead god's body. This changes the feeling of the location retroactively. There is a map fragment called the Round Table Hold map, but it is never found in the game. You cannot access a map of the hold. This could be an oversight, or it could be intentional, suggesting that the hold does not exist in normal geographic space, and therefore cannot be mapped. Enya, the finger reader at the Round Table Hold, wears bandages over her eyes. This is described as necessary to read the two fingers, as seeing them directly would be overwhelming. But there is also a reading that suggests she has seen too much. And the bandages are a kind of protection she applies to herself, not to filter vision in, but to keep something in. The weapons and armor sold by the twin maiden husks, who are the merchants at the Round Table Hold, come from Tarnished who have died. When a Tarnished dies, their bell bearing can be found and given to the husks, who then sell that person's items. This is a system that makes trade morbidly literal. The twin maiden husks themselves are two dead women fused together, sitting in a permanent position of offering. They have no dialogue beyond their merchant function. Their item description says they were once part of an order that served the two fingers and that they died in that service, but the specific cause of death is never described. Remembrances are items you receive for defeating major bosses. They describe the memory of the being you killed, but they do not describe the fight or the moment of death. They describe something from the boss's life, usually something humanizing. This is a consistent design choice that asks you to see the things you kill as more than obstacles. The remembrance of Morgott, the Omen King, describes him as having watched over Leyndell from the shadows for a very long time, protecting a city that would never accept him because of what he was. He is the son of Marika and Godfrey, which makes him royalty, but his Omen body marked him as cursed and unwanted from birth. Omen children were historically thrown into sewers beneath cities in the lands between. This is described in item lore and is one of the more disturbing world-building details. Morgott and his twin Morg both survived this, and both became incredibly powerful, and both held enormous resentment about it, though they expressed that resentment in very different ways. Mohg, Lord of Blood, went underground literally and figuratively. He established a dynasty in a hidden underground area called the Mohgwyn Palace, which is one of the hardest to reach locations in the game, and one that most players either miss entirely or stumble into very late. Mohgwyn Palace is one of the most visually striking areas in the game. It is a dynasty of blood-soaked stone above an enormous lake of blood, illuminated by what appears to be a red moon, or full sun. Everything about it is saturated and strange. Mohg worships an outer god called the Formless Mother, which is described as a god of blood and wounds. Item descriptions suggest that this god reached into Mohg while he was still in the sewers as a child, before he had any power, and offered him something. He accepted, and that acceptance changed everything for him. The contrast between Mohg and Morgott is stark. Both were discarded at birth and given nothing. Morgott chose to protect and serve the system that rejected him. Morgott chose to destroy it and build something new. The game presents both of them as tragic, without clearly judging either choice. Malenia is the sister of Miquella, and Miquella is one of the most important characters in Elden Ring lore, who never actually appears in the game. He is referenced constantly, seen in visions and items, but his physical presence is limited to a hand extending from a cocoon in Mohg's palace. Miquella is described as the most gifted demigod, capable of crafting an entirely new Erd tree and a new set of golden graces. He entered a cocoon specifically to shed his immortality, which he saw as a curse, and to grow into his full power. But Mog stole the cocoon before the process completed. The hand extending from the cocoon is unmoving. Whether Miquella is still alive inside is not confirmed. Whether Mog's interference derailed the process, or whether Miquella's consciousness is still in there, still working toward whatever he was working toward, is something the item lore suggests. Without clarifying, everything Miquella created, including the Halig tree and its community, was made with a genuine desire to protect those who were rejected by the Golden Order. He created a safe place for the cursed, the diseased, and the unwanted. The Halig tree was meant to be an alternative to the Erd tree, not an opponent of it. The Halig tree is one of the most difficult areas in Elden Ring. It is well hidden and requires solving a puzzle involving medallion fragments. When you arrive, it is in a state of decay, its inhabitants dying from a spreading plague. The community Miquella built did not survive his absence. Malenia has been standing guard at the Halig tree in Miquella's absence, waiting for him to return, or perhaps unable to leave. She is covered in scarlet rot, her body barely holding together, and yet she is still the hardest boss in the game. She has been waiting and decaying for what appears to be a very long time. When Malenia speaks to you before the boss fight, she introduces herself and then says that she has never known defeat. This is lore accurate. In the battle against Radahn, neither of them won. She released the rot wave, and Radahn became a rotted husk, and she remained standing. But standing is not quite winning. Her second phase, where she transforms into a flower form, is described in the lore as a bloom, which is the term for when a carrier of the scarlet rot releases a burst of the disease. Each bloom is both a release of power and a step closer to the rot fully consuming her. The Elden Beast, the final boss of the game, is not a created thing in the same way as other enemies. It is described as a fragment of the greater will itself, sent from the outer reaches of the cosmos to maintain the Elden Ring. It is not evil in any human sense. It is simply an instrument of a design that does not have human values. The fight against the Elden Beast takes place in a white void above a shallow sea. The sea is described in concept art and item lore as the Sea of Stars, though this is not made explicit in the game itself. The visual of fighting an enormous astral creature in a limitless white expanse is one of the most otherworldly in any game. Radahn, who you fight immediately before the Elden Beast, is revealed in the fight's opening cinematic to be the same person as Queen Marika. This revelation is presented without explanation, and the game never pauses to fully unpack it. Many players are genuinely confused by it on first playthrough. The lore suggests that Radahn was once a separate person who merged with Marika, or that Marika split into two people at some point, or that they were always two aspects of the same being. The exact nature of their relationship is one of the intentionally unresolved mysteries, described only through fragments and suggestions. Radagon's hammer, which he uses in the boss fight, was used to try to repair the Elden Ring after it was shattered. The cracks in the chamber floor near the Erd tree's base matched the shape of his hammer strikes. He spent an enormous amount of time trying to undo what had been done. There is a detail in the Radahn boss fight that is easy to miss. The attacks that would normally heal other bosses actually damage Radahn. This is because he carries the Elden Ring shards within him, and the same power that restores other things works against him specifically, which connects to lore about his complicated relationship with the Golden Order. The 6 main endings of the game each result in a different state for the lands between. But they all share one thing. The Tarnished become something other than what they were, whether they become a lord, a god, an exile, or something stranger. The act of becoming is the constant. The journey always changes the traveller. The Frenzied Flame ending, often called the Lord of Chaos ending, involves the player receiving the 3 Fingers blessing and burning everything. This ending is the most nihilistic option and results in the complete destruction of the current order. But the item lore for the Frenzied Flame suggests it is not pure destruction. It is described as a return to a state before separation, before the imposition of order. before things were defined against each other. The three fingers, unlike the two fingers who serve the greater will, are not part of the established order. They predate it, or exist outside it. Their location is one of the most hidden in the game, located beneath the capital city in an area accessible through a specific and non-obvious sequence of actions. To reach the three fingers, you must strip off all of your equipment and fall down a very long shaft. The act of arriving is itself a kind of ritual, one that requires becoming vulnerable and letting go of everything you have accumulated. Several players have noted that this feels like intentional game design rather than a technical constraint. The Volcano Manor questline is one of the more morally complex optional paths in the game. You join a group of assassins who ask you to hunt other tarnished across the world. Each target is a named character with a brief description, and after you kill each one, you receive a letter written by that character, describing their worldview. The targets are not presented as villains, they are presented as people. One target in the Volcano Manor questline is a man named Riley the Idle, whose letter after death describes him as someone who had simply stopped trying to pursue the Elden Ring because he had found peace. He was killed for this decision. The implication is that peaceful non-participation was considered a threat by someone. The Volcano Manor is ruled by Tanith, a woman who appears elegant and measured, and who is devoted to Rykard, the demigod who made a pact with a serpent god and was consumed by it. Rykard fed himself to a god of blasphemy and considers this a form of power. Tanith considers this something to worship. After you kill Rykard in the boss fight, Tanith sits beside his remains and begins consuming them. She is eating him. She is still there if you return. This is one of the more disturbing optional discoveries in the game, and is presented without comment. Rykard's domain is full of imagery related to snakes and consumption. There are piles of bones and remnants of previous victims. Rykard himself, after being consumed by the serpent, continued to feed the serpent by luring warriors to his domain. He calls them to fight him, and the serpent eats them. He is both the trap and the bait. The blasphemous blade, which you receive from Rykard's remembrance, has a passive ability that heals you slightly when you kill enemies. This ability is described in its item text as reflecting Rykard's ideology that all lives are fuel for a greater power. Every kill feeds the blade the way every visitor fed the serpent. Godric's weapon, the Axe of Godric, has a description that describes him as weak compared to other demigods, which he compensates for through grafting. But the weapon also mentions that he has grafted the limbs of his own soldiers onto his body, which means the people who served him most closely ended up becoming literally part of him. The Stormvale Castle that Godric rules is built near a cliff that overlooks the sea. The visual design of the castle includes an enormous gate covered in carved eagles. Eagles are Godric's symbol, which is ironic given that he cannot fly and has no particularly eagle-like qualities. The symbol seems aspirational rather than descriptive. There is a soldier in Stormvale Castle who is simply sitting on the ground near a window, not attacking you, just sitting. He has his armor on and his weapon nearby, but he does not engage. Several players have returned to this location multiple times, wondering if he is part of a hidden quest. Current consensus is that he is simply a moment of unexpected stillness in a violent place. There is a chair in Stormvale Castle with a crow sitting on it. The crow is not hostile. The chair appears to be one of importance based on its position. This is one of many instances in the game where the environment tells a story that the narrative never explicitly states. Liurnia of the Lakes is the region north of Limgrave, and it is largely flooded. The ruins beneath the water suggest that Liurnia was once a populated and architecturally sophisticated region before something caused widespread flooding. Item descriptions and environmental details suggest the flooding was connected to the shattering. The Academy of Raya Lucaria sits in the centre of Liurnia, on high ground that was not flooded. It is a school of sorcery that has continued operating despite the collapse of the surrounding region. The students and faculty are still inside, and many have gone mad, but the institution has not stopped. Renala, the head of the academy, was left by her husband Radagon when he went back to marry Marika. She had 3 children with him, Rykard, Ranni, and Radahn, and then was simply abandoned. Her students remained loyal to her. When you meet her, she has retreated into a kind of grief-driven madness, surrounded by students who still sing to her in an attempt to keep her calm. The first phase of the Rennala boss fight involves students who have wrapped themselves in a golden glow and must be thrown against walls to break the protective barrier, keeping Rennala untouchable. The lore description of this phase is that the students are giving everything they have to protect her from you. In the second phase, Rennala uses her power of rebirth to summon spirits of figures from her memory. Among the spirits she summons is what appears to be a small version of a dragon, a wolf, and various other creatures. These are likely memories of things that were important to her, used as weapons because she has no other way to fight. After defeating Rennala, she remains in the game as an NPC who offers you the ability to respec your character. This mechanic is narratively presented as her using the power of rebirth to reshape you. She uses this power in grief and in repetition, endlessly giving new forms to things as a way of processing the life she lost. The full moon spells associated with Rennala are among the most visually dramatic in the game. The description of the full moon sorcery mentions that Rennala once cast her full moon over Radagon, and he was captured by it. This suggests the spell has literal significance in their history, not just a combat function. There is a baby in a jar near the bottom of the Raya Lucaria area. This is part of the rebirth imagery associated with Rennala's power. The jar is sealed. The implication is troubling, without being explicit. The Jarberg area, found in Liurnia, is a small settlement of living jars. These jars were created using the same technique as Alexander the Iron Fist, a travelling pot who you meet and can help through his own questline. Jarberg is one of the more peaceful and unusual optional areas in the game. Alexander's questline involves helping him become stronger by filling him with the remains of defeated warriors. He believes that containing the fallen warriors inside himself honors them and makes him stronger. At the end of his questline, he asks you to defeat him in a duel so that he can finally become the ultimate jar, containing even a piece of you. This is one of the few NPC questlines where the ending involves the player killing someone at that person's own explicit request, and the framing is not tragic. Alexander is satisfied. He accomplished what he set out to do. The living jar enemies that can be hostile throughout the game are a contrast to Alexander's warmth and enthusiasm. They are the same kind of creature, but have been filled with ash and bone without the same sense of purpose. They attack because they have been filled with violence rather than with will. There is an item called the Celestial Dew, used for absolution at the Church of Vows. Absolution removes aggression from NPCs you may have attacked by accident, resetting their relationship with you. The item's description says it was made from the tears of a god, making it perhaps the most dramatic form of forgiveness mechanic in gaming. The Church of Vows is associated with an Albinauric woman named Miriel, who is a turtle wearing a pope hat. She is the keeper of the church and speaks with great dignity and warmth. She describes herself as a servant of the Two Fingers, but her manner is entirely her own, unhurried, thoughtful, genuinely kind. Miriel tells you that she will remain at the Church of Vows no matter what happens, because that is her purpose, and she finds meaning in it. If you return to her late in the game, after the world has changed dramatically, she is still there. She has nothing new to say. She is simply still there. The Albinauric people who appear throughout Liurnia are described as artificial people, created through sorcery. They have a limited lifespan, and many of them are searching for something to give their lives meaning before they die. There is a village of them that has been raided, and most of them are dead. The surviving Albinaurics at that village are hiding in barrels. The Albinauric woman Latenna has a wolf companion who she cannot travel without, so she asks you to carry her as a spirit ash while she rides the wolf. If you find the location she asked you to travel toward, she reunites with something she thought she had lost. Her questline ends with a quiet and understated resolution. The Finger Slayer blade is one of the key items in Ranni's questline, and it is hidden in the Nokron Eternal City, an underground civilization that was held in stasis when Radahn stopped the stars. Nokron is one of the most beautiful areas in the game, full of silver architecture and silver waterfalls, and a quality of light that does not match anything on the surface. The Eternal City was not killed, it was paused. The inhabitants are still present in some form, as spirits or constructs, and the city itself is almost perfectly preserved. It is described in lore as a city that wished to be close to the stars, which is why its fall hit them so completely when the stars were stopped. The ancestor spirit that serves as a boss in Nokron is a massive deer made of starlight. Its death animation involves it slowly dissolving into light and drifting upward. It is one of the most visually gentle boss deaths in the game. To even reach the ancestor spirit fight, you must light a series of bonfires in the correct order. The ritual to summon the spirit is thus embedded in the gameplay in a way that most players perform without understanding what they are doing. When you understand the ritual context, the fight takes on a different quality. The Siofra River area, which is another underground region connected to Nokron by geography and lore, has an enormous purple sky filled with stars. This underground sky is described in lore as a false sky, built to mimic the heavens above. The civilization that built it apparently missed the sky enough to recreate it underground. The enemies in Siofra River include warriors who appear to be guardians of the area's ancient inhabitants. They are hostile but slow, and many of them simply stand in place, as though guarding something specific. One interpretation is that they are following instructions that were given to them so long ago that the thing they were protecting no longer exists. The Nokstella Eternal City is a further underground extension of the same civilization. It contains a boss called the Baleful Shadow, that is a copy of Blade, which suggests that whatever system creates shadows made a shadow of Ranni's shadow, a recursive and disturbing piece of design. The deep underground area below Nokstella contains a boss called the Astal, natural born of the void. This creature fell from space and is described as having caused the underground sky to shatter for the civilizations below. It is alien in a way that few enemies in the game manage to feel genuinely alien. Its second form, Astel Stars of Darkness, appears in a different location as a separate boss. The two Astels are described as possibly being the same entity or the same kind of entity, without a definitive answer. The game treats their existence as a natural phenomenon, like a comet, rather than as an attack. The giant lobsters, found in bodies of water throughout the game, have an item description that refers to them as ancient creatures, unchanged since before the Erd Tree's dominance. They are described as living relics of an older world. The fact that they are simply large crustaceans living in rivers makes this characterization funnier than it might otherwise be. There are invisible scarab enemies scattered throughout the game that leave trails in the grass or sand as they move. Following the trail and attacking in the right spot kills them and rewards you with an item. This mechanic requires patience and observation rather than combat skill. There is an invisible scarab in a specific location in the Altus Plateau that is moving in a circle. If you watch its trail for long enough, it becomes clear it is going nowhere, just circling endlessly. Its behavior pattern is distinct from other scarabs. The Altus Plateau is accessed by combining two halves of a medallion or by traveling through a dangerous underground passage. The medallion route requires finding both halves in different areas of the game. Many players find one half and do not realize it is a two-part item until they have been carrying it for many hours. The Grand Lift of Dectus, which carries you up to the Altus Plateau, when using the medallion, is a massive stone elevator, flanked by enormous figures. The figures are depicted in a posture of reverence or offering. When the lift activates, it does so with a gravity and weight that makes it feel like an important event, rather than a loading screen transition. The Altus Plateau contains the ruins of several civilizations in layers. If you look at certain cliff faces, you can see architectural elements that appear to belong to different periods. Older stone below more recent construction, suggesting that the plateau has been built up over a very long time. There is a spectral knight on horseback in the Altus Plateau who patrols a specific route. He cannot be interacted with and does not attack unless provoked. He simply rides his route over and over. He is described in the environment as a kind of ghost soldier still following orders from a war that ended long ago. The shaded castle in the Altus Plateau is a location filled with poisoned water and hostile knights. At the top of the castle is a boss called the Elemer of the Briar, who fights with a flail and sword while keeping his hands behind his back, controlling the weapons telekinetically. His posture throughout the fight is one of boredom or contempt. Elemer's item descriptions and his questline connection to a specific character suggest he was a nobleman of some kind who fell from grace. His fighting style, elegant and hands-free, reads as the fighting style of someone who never expected to need to fight personally, and adapted an aesthetic to cover for this. The Wyndham Ruins in the Altus Plateau contain a boss called the Tibia Mariner, which is a skeletal figure rowing a boat. The boat appears to be resting on solid ground rather than water, which is never explained. The Tibia Mariner summons skeletons to fight for it, but is otherwise fairly passive. There are Tibia Mariner encounters in multiple locations across the game. Each one is associated with a nearby body of Deathroot and the presence of the bestial sanctum's influence. The Mariner is possibly a ferryman figure, the same archetype found in many mythologies, transporting the dead to wherever they go in this world. The bestial sanctum at the far north of the Caelid region is accessible very early in the game via a teleporter found behind a merchant in the Third Church of Marika. Most players find the teleporter by accident and are immediately killed by the Black Blade Kindred boss outside the sanctum. But if you survive or run past it, you can access the sanctum from the very beginning of the game. Inside the sanctum is Gurunk the Beast Clergyman, who eats Deathroot and rewards you with bestial incantations in exchange. His hunger for Deathroot is described as insatiable and troubling. Later in the game, it is revealed that Gurunk is actually Malekith in a different state, and Malekith is the Black Blade of the Erd Tree, one of the most significant figures in the lore of the Knight of the Black Knives. Malekith carries within him the Rune of Death, specifically the part of it that was not used in the assassination of Godwyn. By carrying it inside himself, he ensures that nothing can truly die as long as the rune is contained. The ability to permanently die, rather than resting at sites of grace, is locked away in him. This is why most enemies in Elden Ring respawn when you rest. Death in the Lands Between is not permanent. The Rune of Death, once stolen and used to create the Death Knives, was partially recovered and sealed inside Malekith. Everything that followed from that, the cycle of death and resurrection, the Tarnished returning again and again, stems from that one decision. The Black Blade Kindred enemies who guard specific sacred locations carry scythes and wings and move in a way that is deliberately unsettling. They are servants of Malekith, or of the concept he represents, and they appear in locations where the boundary between death and the living world is thinnest. Castle Sol in the mountain tops of the Giants is a cold and windswept ruin at a very high elevation. The enemies inside are soldiers frozen in time or spirit, still fighting a battle that ended long ago. The castle was apparently significant enough to be defended by a ghost commander who still patrols its halls. The commander, Nile Boss in Castle Sol, has 2 spirit summons he calls at the start of the fight. These summons are the ghosts of soldiers who served under him. When you defeat them, Nile changes, becoming more aggressive and more desperate. The transition reads as someone watching their last soldiers fall. After defeating Commander Nile, you can access the area beyond Castle Sol, which contains one of the 2 halves of the Haligtree secret medallion. The medallion's other half is in a village in Liurnia that requires a different sequence of events to reach. Players who find both halves often do so completely out of order. The mountaintops of the Giants is the highest region in the game, and the sky there is different from the sky in lower regions. It has a quality of emptiness, a kind of visual quiet, that makes it feel isolated even from the rest of the already isolated lands between. There are giants still alive in the mountaintops. They are slow and enormous, and sad in their movement. Item descriptions about giants in the lands between explain that they were once a proud race with their own culture and fire-keeping tradition, whose flame was stolen by an ancestor of the Erdtree civilization. The flame that was stolen from the giants is still burning at the top of the Forge of the Giants, which is the name of the endgame area at the peak of the highest mountain. It has been burning for a very long time, tended by whatever remained of the giant civilization, and it is the flame that the player uses to begin the ascent to the Erdtree. The last giant, an enemy called the Fire Giant, guards this flame. He is missing a leg, which is described as having been cut off by Marika. He has been chained in place on the mountain, unable to leave, tending the flame for so long that the chain has become part of the landscape. He is a prisoner and a guardian simultaneously. The fight against the fire giant is in two phases. In the second phase, his torso tears free from his legs and crawls toward you using his hands. He is still trying to protect the flame, even while his body is failing. In this context, his aggression reads less as hostility and more as exhaustion. After the fire giant dies, his body remains on the field. If you walk to the edge of the mountain near where he died and look out, you can see the Erdtree in the distance, lit by the fire that was just set. This view is one of the most deliberately composed visual moments in the game. The Forbidden Lands, which connects the mountain tops to the Erdtree interior, are covered in a black wind that obscures vision. There is almost nothing in this area. It is described as a boundary, not a place. Moving through it feels like passing through a threshold, rather than travelling through a landscape. The Leyndell capital, the city surrounding the Erdtree, goes through two distinct states over the course of the game. In its initial state, it is decayed but recognizable. Later in the game, after a specific event, it becomes covered in ash and is called the Ashen Capital. The transformation happens between one version of the area and another. In the Ashen version of Leyndell, almost all of the former enemies have been replaced by a different set. Walking through an area you already explored feels unsettling because it is almost the same but changed in ways that feel specific rather than random. There is a bed of flowers in the Ashen Capital in a location that does not have flowers in the original version. Whether this was placed deliberately as a lore detail or as an environmental tribute to something from the developers is something that has been debated by players. Malenia, the character who serves as your guide and offers you the ability to level up, is described as a maiden without a maiden's purpose. Her origin is never fully explained. She has one eye that is closed, and when her closed eye is seen in a flashback or reflection, it contains imagery of flame. She sacrificed herself to burn the Erdtree, which was her stated purpose for travelling with you. But Malenia does not die in any permanent sense if you reach the Frenzied Flame, ending before she sacrifices herself. In that case, her sacrifice becomes unnecessary, and she appears at the very end of the credits to say that she will find you and kill you for what you have chosen. This is the only moment in the game where she expresses uncomplicated anger. There is a ghost of Malenia found in a specific location who describes a vision of a burning room, and a mother who asked something of her. This is the only real lore we get about her origin, and it points toward her being connected to Marika in some way, possibly as a child, possibly as something else. The sites of grace that function as checkpoints throughout the game are described as remnants of Erdtree roots. They provide warmth and safety and carry memory. Several grace sites in the game have small golden blossoms growing near them that exist nowhere else in the surrounding environment. There is a grace site at the very start of the game that contains more ambient warmth in its visual design than most other graces. Several players have described spending time sitting at this grace and not moving because the atmosphere of it feels like rest in a way that the rest of the game does not. The guidance of grace. The wisps that direct you toward objectives are described in lore as fragments of guidance sent by a higher power, but they only appear when you are near a site of grace and look in the right direction. They do not always point toward the most obvious path. Several of the wisps point toward things that require significant travel and discovery before their significance becomes clear. The Academy Glintstone Key, required to enter the Academy of Raya Lucaria, is found in a specific location guarded by a sleeping dragon. The dragon is named Glintstone Dragon Smarag. The Tolkien reference in the naming is not subtle, and it's been confirmed to be intentional by a game designer in an interview. There are several Glintstone dragon enemies in the game, all of which are enormous and very powerful. They represent a pre-Erd tree form of life, dragons who had not yet been domesticated or allied with the Golden Order. In earlier ages of the Lands Between, some dragons chose to align with the civilization that worshipped the Erd tree, and their descendants are somewhat different from the wild dragons. The dragon lord Placidusax is one of the oldest enemies in the game, and is accessed through a very specific interaction. You must lie down in a specific spot in a region called Farum Azula, which causes you to be transported to a special arena. Placidusax is described as having once been the Elden Lord before Marika, in an era when a different god held the Elden Ring. That previous god, whoever it was, departed. Placidusax waited for its god's return, and has been waiting ever since. The arena in which you find it is a remnant of that older age, still existing somehow in parallel to the current world. Placidusax fights with red lightning and temporal effects that blur the boundary between where it is and where it was. Farum Azula is a crumbling city, floating in the sky, held together by supernatural forces, slowly falling apart. It is described as existing in a time separate from the rest of the game, which explains its visual design of stonework floating in a void, with lightning constantly surrounding it. The draconic tree sentinel, who guards a key entrance in Farum Azula, is armoured entirely in dragon scales and fights with lightning. He is one of several tree sentinel variants encountered across the game. The original tree sentinel, encountered very early in Limgrave, is almost impossible for new players, but is merely difficult for experienced ones. The difference in that tree sentinel fight between a new player and an experienced player is often described as almost a metaphor for the whole game. The game is presenting you with something that seems impossible, waiting for you to grow enough to handle it, and never changing the obstacle to match your level. There is a tower in Liurnia called the Divine Tower of Liurnia that is associated with Renala's Great Rune. Each Great Rune requires being taken to a specific divine tower to be charged before it can be used. The towers were apparently created as interfaces between the demigod holders and the power of the Elden Ring. The divine towers all have the same architectural style, which suggests they were built in the same period by the same civilization. Their locations around the map form a rough ring or pattern, which several players have mapped out and found to be geometrically significant. Though what that geometry means is unclear. There are birds in Elden Ring that drop runes when killed, specifically a type of bird found near the Mogwin Palace that drops an unusually large amount. Players discovered this and created a farming route that allowed extremely fast rune accumulation. This became one of the most widely shared tips in the community. Runes themselves are described as the remnants of the Elden Ring's shattered power, distributed throughout the world. Every enemy drops runes when it dies, because everything in the Lands Between carries a fragment of that original power. When you collect runes and use them to level up, you're literally absorbing fragments of divine power. The level up system requires speaking with Malenia to convert runes into attributes. This makes leveling up a collaborative act. When Malenia is gone, after her sacrifice, you can still level up, which raises a question about who is performing the conversion. 1. Reading is that by that point the player has absorbed enough grace to do it alone. There are cookbooks scattered throughout the game that teach you new crafting recipes. These cookbooks are described in their item text as having been assembled by specific individuals in specific places. Following the trail of certain cookbooks leads you to understand something about the regions they came from. One cookbook found near the Redmane Castle in Caelid is described as having been compiled during a time when the castle was still functional and the surrounding region was not yet blighted. Reading the cookbook is thus reading a document from before the catastrophe that made the whole region what it is now. There is a character named Hugh at the Round Table Hold, who is a smith and can improve your weapons. He describes himself as cursed to serve tarnished until he has forged a god-slaying weapon. He believes this is a punishment, but he takes his craft seriously regardless. There is something quietly dignified about how he approaches his curse. Hugh's questline involves you bringing him specific remembrances and ashes of war, and each time you do, he seems slightly more fulfilled. His curse apparently requires more than just waiting. It requires active craft and purpose. The game never resolves whether he succeeds in forging the weapon he is cursed to create. The perfumers are a type of humanoid enemy found in specific regions who use incantation-based attacks involving perfume. They are described in item lore as a type of warrior who served in the Golden Order's more refined courts, trained to fight using alchemical compounds rather than direct combat. Their combat style is elegant and strange in a way that matches this description. There is a perfumer found sitting in a chair in the Altus Plateau who does not attack you unless you attack first. He is simply sitting there. This is one of several humanoid enemies in the game whose behavior seems to suggest a life or purpose beyond simple aggression. The Erd Tree Burial Watchdogs are stone lions that guard specific underground locations. They are described as constructs rather than living creatures, made specifically to protect the dead. Their design is based on the lion-dog figures found in historical Asian architecture, and several players have drawn attention to how precisely the animation captures the weight of solid stone. The underground areas in Elden Ring form a geography that is as large and complex as the surface. The Siofa River, Nokrom, the Ainsel River, the Lake of Rot, the Deeproot Depths, and the subterranean shunning grounds all exist in layers beneath the surface, connected by falls and passages. Mapping the underground relative to the surface reveals interesting spatial relationships. The subterranean shunning grounds beneath the Lanedell capital contain the sewer system where Omen children were historically discarded. Navigating through it means physically traveling through the place where the society above sent those it wanted to disappear. At the bottom of this place is one of the three fingers encounters mentioned earlier. There is a painting quest in the game that involves finding the locations depicted in specific paintings. Completing each painting quest by standing in the correct location causes a ghost of the painter to appear briefly and then disappear. The ghost is always kneeling and appears to be in a moment of creative inspiration or completion. One painting found in Stormvale Castle depicts a location on the Weeping Peninsula, which is a southern region most players bypass entirely in favour of heading north toward the capital. Finding the location depicted in this painting and triggering the ghost is one of the more peaceful moments in the Weeping Peninsula. The Weeping Peninsula gets its name from the rain that seems to fall there more than elsewhere. It is a quiet region, full of minor ruins and a few notable side quests. Compared to the urgency of the main path, spending time in the Weeping Peninsula feels like a digression, which may be exactly what some players need. Castle Morn, at the far south of the Weeping Peninsula, contains a questline involving a soldier named Edgar and his daughter Irina. The questline is short and ends badly regardless of the choices you make, but the way it ends reflects something real about what war and loyalty and loss do to people over time. Irina, Edgar's daughter, is found sitting by a road and asks you to deliver a letter to her father in Castle Morn. The letter is a plea for him to leave the castle and come home. When you deliver it, Edgar refuses to leave because he is bound by duty. When you return to where Irina was sitting, she is dead. The letter she sent did not save her. Edgar then appears later as an invader who attacks you. He has become someone whose grief has been transformed into aggression, targeting the nearest living thing rather than the thing that deserves it. This is a very short arc, but it is one of the cleanest emotional trajectories in the game. There is a ghost visible from certain angles in the Weeping Peninsula, who appears to be weeping. This could be a visual glitch or coincidence, but its location near one of the named ruins of the peninsula makes some players think it is intentional, a resident of the peninsula before whatever catastrophe created its current state. The isolated Divine Tower in the ocean to the east is accessible only via a teleporter found near the Round Table Hold. Getting there requires knowing exactly which teleporter to use, which is not explained. The tower itself is empty, except for a specific function, and the view from the top of it looking out over the ocean is one of the longest unobstructed views in the game. The ocean in Elden Ring cannot be crossed or entered. If you walk into the sea, it kills you quickly. This is a standard game boundary, but the visual design of the ocean, the color and lighting, suggests that someone put considerable effort into a space that players can only look at from a distance. There are fishing spots in the game that have been marked in the environment as clearly used by previous inhabitants, including smoking pits and drying racks near bodies of water. There are no fishing mechanics in the game. These spots are simply evidence of a way of life that no longer exists. There is a location in Caelid called the Cathedral of Dragon Communion, where you can exchange dragon hearts for dragon-based incantations. The cathedral is partially ruined, open to the sky, and the altar inside is described as once having served a different function before being repurposed for dragon worship. A body of a dragon lies near the cathedral, far too large to have fit through any of the current entrances. Either the cathedral was built around the dragon's body after death, or the cathedral's structure has collapsed enough over time to make the original entrance invisible. Both readings have support in the surrounding environment. The Dragon Barrow area of Caelid has the densest concentration of dragon enemies in the game, including dragons of unusual size and coloration. The area around the Bestial Sanctum in the north of this region is where the largest and most aggressive dragons are found, suggesting a territorial distribution even among creatures this powerful. There is a dragon in the Dragon Barrow who is significantly smaller than the others and does not attack unless provoked. Players have speculated that it is a younger dragon, not yet mature enough to be territorial. Nothing in the item lore confirms this, but the behavioral difference is notable. The magma worm enemies, which are serpentine creatures that move through flowing magma, are described in item lore as related to, but distinct from dragons. They are older, more primitive, and associated with a time before the dragon civilization that came to serve the Erd Tree. Magma worm Maka, in particular, is a boss found deep underground, far from any volcanic surface, which suggests these creatures were driven down over time. There is a large iron ball trap in the game in a tunnel in Caelid that, if triggered, will roll down the tunnel and kill almost any enemy in its path, as well as the player. Players who first saw this trap die to it. Players who see it a second time often deliberately trigger it to clear the tunnel of enemies, and then chase the ball back to get the item reward for surviving. The item reward at the end of that tunnel is described as having been placed there specifically by someone who expected most people to die to the trap, and who was leaving something for the rare visitor who made it through. Whether this is developer flavor text or genuine in-world logic is one of those questions that Elden Ring never resolves. There are cookbooks in the game that are described as having been lost for centuries, rediscovered in ruins by unnamed travelers, and passed on through a chain of unknown hands before ending up in a chest somewhere. The provenance described in these books is more elaborate than necessary for a simple crafting recipe, suggesting that the depth of world building extends even to objects most players never read carefully. The meteorite staff, one of the best early game staves, is found on a corpse hanging out of a second-story window in the Street of Sages ruins in Caelid. Players who know to look for it find it very early and significantly boost their spellcasting. The character who died with it was apparently fleeing from something and did not make it out of the window. The Street of Sages ruins is a location full of the remnants of what appears to have been a community of sorcerers, now dead and corrupted. Sitting in the middle of this community is an NPC named Sorceress Selen, accessible through a hatch in the ground, who survived and continues to practice sorcery. Her questline is one of the most elaborate in the game. Selen's questline eventually reveals that she was once a member of the Academy who was expelled for practicing a form of sorcery called graven sorcery, which involves the use of human bodies as components. She was stripped of her flesh and her soul was moved to different bodies across multiple locations. This is not a metaphor. At the end of her questline, if you support her, she gains access to a primordial sorcery that she has been seeking her entire life, and it transforms her into a massive sphere made of the compressed heads and bodies of sorcerers. This is one of the most disturbing transformations a character undergoes in a game that is not short on disturbing things. There are sorcerers in the academy who have undergone a transformation called crystallization, where their bodies have become partially crystalline. This is described as the result of overuse of glintstone sorcery, which is itself described as using starlight that carries a living essence. Using too much of it apparently causes it to take root in the user's body. The glintstone that powers sorcery in Elden Ring is described as the life of stars, frozen into physical form. This means every sorcerer is using a material that is literally made of dead starlight. Whether this carries any moral weight in the world of the game is something item lore suggests, but does not conclude. The Carian Study Hall is a building in Liurnia associated with the Carian royal family, who are themselves associated with the moon and with glintstone sorcery. The building contains a rotating section that, when you use a specific item, flips upside down, changing the entire interior layout. This is one of the more inventive dungeon design choices in the game. The Carian Royal Manor is the former home of Renala's family, before the academy took prominence. It is now in ruins and filled with the spirits of the family's warriors, still defending a home that no longer exists. Walking through it, with knowledge of Renala's backstory, changes how the ruins feel. There is a Three Sisters area behind the Carian Royal Manor that contains towers associated with Ranni, Renala, and a third sister who is not clearly named in most sources. The towers are locked in various ways, and their interiors tell stories through objects and items rather than through direct narrative. Ranni's tower contains a doll version of herself, which is the same type of doll body she uses throughout the game. This doll is different from Ranni's current doll in certain small details, suggesting it is an older version, a prototype or predecessor to the form she currently inhabits. The Tower of Return in the Weeping Peninsula, when you reach its top, contains a chest that teleports you directly to the Erdtree capital. This is a shortcut that some players discover long before they have any reason to go to the capital, resulting in them appearing in an endgame area extremely early and being immediately killed by everything around them. The chest teleport trick, as it is sometimes called, is reminiscent of a similar trap in Dark Souls, where a chest teleports you to a prison. From Software is aware that players will explore vertically and has repeatedly placed both rewards and surprises at the tops of towers specifically for this reason. There is a secret passage behind a statue in Stormvale Castle that leads to a room with a view of the outside. The view from this room shows Stormvale's courtyard from an angle that makes the scope of the castle more legible than it is when you are walking through it. Several players have reported pausing here just to understand where they are. The overall map of the lands between, when seen from above, has a shape that some players have noted resembles a figure or a symbol when compared to the in-game map's contours. Whether this is intentional artistic design or pareidolia is debated, but the team at From Software has been known to embed symbolic shapes into level geometry. There is a building in Lanedale called the Avenue Balcony area that has a specific window from which you can see three significant landmarks simultaneously: the Erdtree, a specific tower, and the church in the distance. The sight lines required to make this view work suggest that it was composed deliberately. The boss, called Morgott the Omen King, who guards the inner capital, gives a speech before the fight about the Tarnished being unworthy. His speech includes references to golden grace and great runes that indicate he understands the lore of the world more deeply than most characters you interact with. He is not confused about what is happening, he simply disagrees with it. After defeating Morgott, you receive his great rune and a remembrance. The remembrance describes him as having loved Lanedale even as Lanedale rejected him, and his reign as self-appointed king as an act of devotion rather than ambition. He protected a city that would have thrown him in the sewers if it had known who he was. There is a golden summon sign in front of the Morgott arena that belongs to a character named Malenia. If you summon her, she fights alongside you in a version of herself that uses fire and a dagger. This is one of the only moments in the game where Malenia is shown in combat, and her moveset provides clues about her nature and abilities that her dialogue never directly states. The Margit fight has a similar summon available for a character named Rogier. Rogier's questline, if completed, reveals that he is slowly dying from an affliction connected to Godwyn's spreading body. His participation in the Margit fight takes on a different weight once you understand that he is already dying and fighting anyway. Rogier can be found later in the Round Table Hold. Increasingly weak, eventually immobile in a chair, he passes on information that is relevant to understanding the Knight of the Black Knives in exchange for items. At the very end of his questline, he is simply gone. His chair is empty, and his bell-bearing appears nearby. There is a set of armor called the Twinned Armor that can be found near Dee's body after a specific sequence of events. The armor belonged to both of the twin brothers, and is used by the survivor of whatever happens between them. Wearing it, after the events that conclude their arc, changes how the piece feels compared to its item description alone. The item descriptions in Elden Ring are some of the most carefully written text in any video game. They are frequently the only source of narrative information for events that happened long before the game begins. Many players have described reading item descriptions as a secondary experience that runs parallel to and enriches the primary gameplay. There are items in the game whose descriptions reference other items, creating chains of information that reward players who read everything carefully. Following one such chain from the Black Knife armor to the Black Knife print, to the Black Knife boss, to the Rune of Death, takes you from a physical object through a crime, to a perpetrator, to a cosmic event. The Black Knife assassins, who appear as enemies in certain locations, are described as being women who gave up their names and identities in service to a specific ideology. Their armor makes them nearly silent, described as muffling even the sound of their presence. This suits their historical role as assassins who killed in the night without being detected. There is one named Black Knife assassin, Electo, who serves as an optional boss. Her fight is notably faster and more aggressive than the unnamed assassins. Her remembrance describes her as the leader of the assassination plot, suggesting that she was present on the night of the Black Knives herself. The deathbed dress worn by Fia is described in a way that suggests it exists outside normal material categories. It is connected to her role as a deathbed companion, which is a kind of functionary in a belief system that views death as a form of rest and connection. She holds the dying and the dead, and the dress is part of this ritual. There is a deathbed companion-related item description that uses language usually reserved for religious vestments, which suggests that the role carried genuine spiritual weight in the culture that created it. By the time of the game, this culture has largely been suppressed by the Golden Order. The Golden Order itself is described in item lore as one of several possible arrangements of divine law that have existed in the lands between over time. The game implies strongly that there have been ages before the current one, with different gods and different rules, and that the current Golden Order is not inevitable or eternal. The fracture mechanic, where certain characters become frenzied or corrupted by outer gods, suggests that the world is contested by multiple divine forces, each trying to shape the lands between according to their own nature. The Golden Order is simply the currently dominant one, and its dominance is specifically what the Shattering has put in question. The outer gods in Elden Ring lore are entities from beyond the known cosmology who reach into the world and influence it. They include the Greater Will, the Formless Mother, the God of Rot, the God of the Frenzied Flame, and possibly others unnamed. Each one has adherents and aspects within the game world. The way these outer gods communicate is through symbols and physical manifestation rather than language. The 2 fingers and 3 fingers are literally the fingers of gods, reaching into the world through a scale difference that makes communication gesture-based rather than verbal. There are finger-related items throughout the game that range from comedic to deeply unsettling. The festering bloody finger, the furl-calling finger remedy, the missionary's cookbook, and the taunter's tongue all use finger imagery in ways that are either practical, lore-relevant, or both. The multiplayer mechanics of Elden Ring, the summoning of helpers and the invasion of enemies, are lore explained as the intersection of different versions of the lands between. When you summon a cooperator, you are pulling someone from a parallel or adjacent version of the world, not directly from another player's game. in any narrative sense. The tarnished furled finger. The item used to create a summon sign is described as a finger that has been curled in a permanent gesture of invitation. Its use is thus literally the gesture of welcoming someone into your world. There is a hostile invader archetype called the Bloody Finger who invades other players' worlds to kill them. The lore describes Bloody Fingers as former tarnished who have rejected the guidance of grace and instead follow the formless mother or simply their own desire. They are players who have chosen invasion as their primary means of engaging with the world. The Ensha character at the Round Table Hold, who eventually attacks you, is similarly described as someone who chose aggression, but his motivation, unlike the Bloody Fingers, appears to be connected to something specific about you or something you carry. His attack happens at a particular point in Ranni's questline, suggesting he was watching you and waiting for a moment. There is a whetstone knife found early in the game that allows you to apply Ashes of War special abilities to your weapons. The item description says the knife was used in old rituals of weapon blessing, and that its current use as a practical crafting tool is a secularized version of something that was once sacred. The Ashes of War themselves are described as fragments of the spirit of warriors, techniques that outlasted the warriors who used them. Applying an Ash of War to a weapon is thus described as awakening a method of fighting that was preserved in a more abstract form after the original fighter was gone. There is a specific Ash of War called the Royal Knight's Resolve that, according to item descriptions, was used by Godric's soldiers. Applying it to a weapon lets you use the technique those soldiers used. Given what we know about Godric's soldiers, this is either poignant or grim, depending on your perspective. The Moonveil Katana, one of the most popular weapons in the game, has an Ash of War that produces a distinctive visual effect. Its item description connects it to the moon imagery of the Carian royal family and to Rennala specifically. Wielding it places you in a lineage of aesthetic that has specific meaning in the world's history. There are weapons in the game that can only be obtained by trading boss remembrances with Enya at the Round Table Hold. This means you are choosing between two possible items created from the memory of something you killed. The choice feels weighted in a way that a normal loot drop does not. The Godskin Apostles and Godskin Nobles are enemies who wear the flayed skins of gods as robes. Their item descriptions explain that this is a practice with deep ritual roots, that they are members of a specific group who have pursued this tradition for a very long time. The combination of the visual design and the item lore makes them among the most conceptually disturbing enemies in the game. The Godskin duo boss fight in Farum Azula involves both a noble and an apostle fighting simultaneously. The fight is widely considered one of the most frustrating because the enemies share a health pool and respawn. But the reason they respawn, according to lore, is that Godskin practitioners have a specific relationship with death that makes them difficult to kill permanently. There is a sleep mechanic in Elden Ring that allows you to put enemies to sleep using specific items or abilities. The Godskin duo, despite being one of the most difficult fights, can be made significantly easier by using sleep pots. This discovery spread through the community and became one of the most recommended strategies. The items that cause sleep are described in the game as being made from a specific flower that grows in places where dreams gather. Dreams in the lands between are described in lore as having a semi-physical presence, which makes sleep items the only mechanic that interacts directly with the dream-adjacent aspects of the world. There is a location in the game where you can literally enter a dream. The Halig Drake's chest, accessed through a specific sequence in the Elden Ring's final areas, contains a space described as being made of memory or dream rather than physical reality. Enemies inside behave differently from enemies in the normal world. The Dragonkin soldiers are large, humanoid enemies with dragon-like features who appear in underground areas. They are described as soldiers who are in the process of transforming into dragons when the process was interrupted or reversed. The transformation being partial is the reason they have humanoid posture but draconic anatomy. There is a specific Dragonkin soldier boss who drops an item describing the transformation process and suggesting it was done willingly, that these soldiers agreed to become something between human and dragon as a form of devotion. The interruption of the process is not described as the cause of their aggression, but it is implied. The giant hands that appear in late-game areas, called finger creepers, are the most visually unusual enemies in the game. They are enormous crawling hands, and their item lore describes them as having grown from abandoned finger runes, divine appendages that were discarded or lost, and eventually developed into independent creatures. The finger creeper design was apparently derived from an older piece of Elden Ring concept art that depicted the world before the Erdtree's civilization as being populated by stranger, more surreal creatures. Some of that original design made it into the game in the form of these and other unusual enemies. There are legacy dungeons in Elden Ring that are large, complex, multi-level structures designed in the style of earlier From Software games. Stormvale, the Academy, Redmane Castle, Volcano Manor, the Erdtree Sanctuary, and Farum Azula are among these. They are designed to be explored non-linearly, with multiple routes and many secrets. The Erdtree Sanctuary itself contains a boss called the Elden Beast, but before that there is a hall of statues depicting figures from the Lands Between's history. Players who have progressed far enough to read the associated item descriptions can identify several of the statues, but several others depict figures who are never named anywhere in the game. There is a statue in the Erdtree Sanctuary area that has a deliberately obscured face. Unlike other statues in the same area, this one's face is worn smooth, either by time or by intention. Several players have noted that it is positioned in a way that suggests it depicts someone important, and the fact that its face cannot be read suggests a deliberate erasure. The naming of locations in Elden Ring follows patterns that reward attention to linguistics. Names like Farum Azula, which roughly translates from multiple linguistic roots to something like blue distance or far blue, and Leyndell, which appears to derive from older Germanic words for light and valley, are constructed with care, even if they are ultimately fictional. There is a character named Seofrazen, mentioned in item lore, who is never encountered as an NPC and has no presence in the game outside of being referenced. This kind of referenced but absent character is a common Elden Ring technique for implying a larger world outside the player's experience. The map fragments you find are accompanied by the sound of a low, resonant tone when they expand to fill in a new area. This sound design detail is something many players only notice after hearing it many times, at which point they realize they associate it with the feeling of a world becoming larger. There are invisible walls in Elden Ring, but far fewer than in previous From Software games. Most hidden paths are hidden through visual obscuring, like mist or shadow, rather than through invisible geometry. Players who are used to previous games spend considerable time hitting walls that turn out to not be fake, which is its own form of surprise. The one-way messages that players can leave for each other using preset phrases are limited in vocabulary, but have been used by the community to create an elaborate vocabulary of understood meaning. A message reading, "Beware enemy ahead," is obvious. A message reading, "Genius ahead, be wary of friendship," is an ironic comment on a nearby NPC. The community has essentially created a language within the game's constraints. There are messages in the game that simply say, "Here," with no other context. Some of these indicate a hidden item directly beneath the message. Others are in locations where nothing is present. Players have spent considerable time investigating these messages. The bell-bearing system, in which you take an item from a dead merchant to a hub and unlock their inventory permanently, means that every merchant who dies has their knowledge and stock preserved in a specific form. The merchants themselves are lost, but what they carried continues. This is one of the system's quieter design implications. There is a merchant named Kale in the Church of Ele at the very start of the game, who provides some of the earliest items and who will give you a bell and pouch if you have spoken to Malenia. Kale has more dialogue than most merchants, and a backstory hinted at in his item descriptions. He is described as having travelled a great distance to be where he is. The Church of Ele is one of the first buildings you reach in Limgrave. It is in relatively good condition compared to other ruins nearby, which several players have noted as strange. A possible reading is that Marika's churches are protected in some way from the decay affecting everything else, but this is not stated explicitly. There is a site of grace inside the Church of Elleh that is positioned directly in front of the altar, making the act of resting feel like an act of devotion, whether you intend it that way or not. The spatial design of the church's interior encourages this reading without forcing it. The night sky in Elden Ring is one of the most detailed night sky representations in any open-world game. Players have identified what appear to be specific star formations, and some have attempted to map them to real-world constellations, or to constellations that appear in the game's lore. One star visible from specific locations in Limgrave on clear nights is positioned exactly where a falling star strikes later in the game. After the Radahn boss is completed, this means the star was present in the sky before the event, suggesting that the falling star was always there, visible to anyone who looked up. The comet sorceries in the game, specifically Comet Azure and Stars of Ruin, are among the most powerful. Their item descriptions connect them to the Academy's research into the nature of stars as living things. Comet Azure, in particular, describes a lost technique of drawing a star's full power through a specific hand gesture, and the casting animation reflects this. There are two versions of most large bosses, a first phase and a second phase, with a cutscene transition. The cutscenes for these phase transitions are almost always shown from a specific angle that emphasizes what is changing about the boss rather than the attack that triggered the transition. The direction of these cutscenes was clearly deliberate. Starscourge Radahn's phase transition involves a meteor impact. The camera pulls back far enough to show the scale of the impact relative to both the player character and Radahn, and then holds on Radahn rising from the crater. The duration of this cutscene is longer than most phase transitions, as though it is aware of the spectacle it is showing you. The Rennala phase transition involves her rising from the floor in an image that deliberately echoes the moon. Her hair floats. The camera angle emphasizes her slow ascent. From a purely visual standpoint, her boss fight is one of the most carefully staged in the game. The Godfrey boss fight has a phase transition where he removes his golden spectral lion and becomes Hawara Lux. This moment is accompanied by a speech that changes his characterization entirely. Godfrey was the polished Elden Lord. Hawara Lux is the warrior he was before all of that. The transition strips away centuries of civilization in a single moment. When Hawara Lux speaks to you after the transition, he is genuinely excited. He has not had a real fight in a very long time, and fighting you allows him to be what he actually is, rather than what he became. This is one of the few boss fights where the enemy is having a good time. There is a gesture in Elden Ring called the Erdtree Great Shield Stance that mirrors the specific way a knight appears in a piece of in-game artwork. Players who found the gesture, performed it in the location shown in the artwork, and took screenshots have created images that are nearly identical to the original art. This is a very specific kind of environmental storytelling. The gesture system in Elden Ring includes dozens of gestures that can be used for social interaction in multiplayer. Many of these gestures have names and descriptions that connect them to specific in-game cultures or characters. The Path of the Dragon gesture, for example, is a meditation pose described as being used by those who follow the ancient dragon traditions. Using the Path of the Dragon gesture in front of a specific altar in the game progresses a quest line. This means a social mechanic that looks like pure cosmetics has a functional purpose in at least one specific context. There is an area in the game called the Bestial Sanctum that can only be fully explored after killing the Black Blade kindred outside it. Inside, the walls are covered in carved beasts and animal imagery that predates the Erdtree's aesthetic by what appears to be several ages. The bestial faith it represents is described in lore as older than recorded history. D, the Hunter of the Dead's armor, is described as having been made specifically to mark him as an enemy of death-related entities. The material is treated with something that repels Deathroot and causes discomfort to entities connected to Godwyn's spreading body. He walks through the world as a kind of repellent, clearing out death wherever he goes. There is a sealed room in the Round Table Hold that you can only open after reaching a certain point in the story. What is inside is something that changes how the hold feels retrospectively, shifting it from a sanctuary to something more complicated. The fire in the round table hold's fireplace burns constantly. Every time you visit, every hour you spend in the hold, the fire is burning. No one tends it. It never goes out. This is the kind of detail that is too consistent to be accidental, and yet is never explained. The music in the round table hold is different from the music in any other location in the game. It is quieter, less melodic, more ambient. It is designed to feel like the absence of the music outside, rather than a music of its own. Players who spend long periods in the hold describe a sense of stillness that the outside world never provides. The boss music across Elden Ring is composed to match the character of each boss. Malenia's theme is described by the composer as reflecting both her elegance and her rot, the beauty of something that is destroying itself. Godric's theme is martial and slightly chaotic, reflecting his aggressive instability. The Elden Beast's theme is open and cosmic, suggesting something vast and indifferent. Radahn's boss music begins with a silence, and then a guitar riff, which is completely unlike anything else in the game's soundtrack. Players encountering him for the first time frequently mention the music as something that stuck with them. Its genre incongruity matches Radahn's character, a demigod who is also just a really good warrior who likes to have fun. Mog's theme contains chanting that is described in the game's credits as representing the formless mother's influence. The chanting gets louder and more distorted as the fight progresses, reflecting Mog's increasing connection to his patron god as the battle intensifies. The sound design of footsteps in Elden Ring changes based on the surface you are walking on. Stone floors, grass, water, sand, and wooden platforms all have distinct footstep sounds. This level of audio detail is one of those things that players rarely consciously notice, but that contributes significantly to the sense of the world being real. There is a specific rock formation in Limgrave that, when you stand at its base and look up, frames the Erd tree perfectly in the space between the rocks. This view is so composed that several players have suggested it is intentional, a moment of environmental beauty built into the geometry of what looks like a random cliff. The Colosseum arenas, added to Elden Ring after launch, are described in item lore as having been built for a civilization that has since ended. The bleachers where audiences once sat are empty, the spaces still echoing with an old purpose. Using them for PvP play resonates with their historical function, even though the context has changed completely. There is a character called the Jar Bairn in Jarberg, who is a small jar child and who has one of the most touching questlines in the game, despite being entirely optional and extremely easy to miss. The Jar Bairn asks you about Alexander, and if you have completed Alexander's questline, you can tell the Jar Bairn what happened. The reaction is quiet and sad, in a way that earns it. The questline cannot end happily because of the nature of Alexander's arc, but the Jar Bairn's response to the news of what Alexander chose shows a level of emotional sophistication that is unusual for a character who has very few lines of dialogue, and who appears to be a jar with a face. There is a carriage in the Altus Plateau that carries an Erd Tree burial watchdog. The carriage is moving when you find it, being pulled by horses, apparently with a destination, or at least a direction. Where it is going, and what it contains beyond the Guardian, is never stated. If you defeat the Guardian and open the carriage, you find a specific item that gives no further context about the carriage's journey. The Spirit Spring jump mechanics in the game, where columns of air allow your mount to leap enormous heights, are explained in lore as natural phenomena connected to the underground wind systems of the lands between. They are technically a geological feature that happens to function as a traversal mechanic. Your mount, Torrent, is given to you by Malenia as if it is the most natural thing in the world. But Torrent's origin is never explained. Malenia says he chose you. Certain item descriptions suggest Torrent is connected to a lineage of steeds associated with death and passage between worlds. He has 2 spectral legs and moves faster than any living horse. There is a gesture that can be performed on Torrent's back that causes both you and Torrent to bow simultaneously. Players who discovered this and performed it near NPCs, found that some NPCs react differently to it than they do to other gestures. Whether this is a coded interaction or a coincidence of animation timing is unclear. The Spirit Spring locations often overlook something specific: a waterfall, a ruin, a boss arena. The game appears to have placed them with a view in mind, so that the moment of leaping is also a moment of seeing something worth seeing. The giant bats found in cave systems are described as having evolved in darkness and having been transformed by proximity to the underground regions associated with Godwin's body. Their echolocation is described in item lore as having been warped into something that can detect not just physical objects but spiritual presences. The Clean Rot Knights, who serve Malenia, are described as having inoculated themselves against scarlet rot to a degree sufficient to survive near her. Their armour bears filtration elements designed to manage the rot. Their devotion to Malenia is described as total and voluntary. There is a Clean Rot Knight who is found sitting against a wall in the Haligtree area and is not aggressive unless approached. She is simply sitting there, watching the decaying community around her. There is no item near her, and she has no quest line. She is simply one of the last of something. The Miquella's Needle item, used in the Dragon Lord Placidusax arena, is one of the most narratively loaded items in the game. It was created by Miquella, and its description suggests that he anticipated the possibility that someone would need to undo the Frenzied Flame's influence. He made something to help before he was taken, before he could know that it would be needed. This is either a coincidence, a design oversight, or a suggestion that Miquella's foresight was genuinely extraordinary. The third reading is supported by everything else item lore suggests about him. The needle's use requires going to a specific location and using it in a specific way that is not explained by the game. Players who found it through exploration rather than guides have described the discovery of its use as one of the most satisfying puzzle solutions in Elden Ring, both because it was entirely non-obvious and because it felt earned. The ending cinematics for all 6 endings are different in both content and tone. The Age of Stars ending, Ranni's ending, is described by many players as the most hopeful because it explicitly introduces something new rather than restoring or destroying what exists. Whether hope in this context is good or merely different is left open. The Fractured ending, the most basic ending where you simply mend the Elden Ring and become the new Elden Lord, is described in its associated item lore as producing an era of no great distinction, which is either a comfort or a disappointment, depending on what you were hoping for. The Lord of Frenzied Flame ending, the most destructive, ends with your character standing on an ash-covered world with an eye open in your back. The eye is the Frenzied Flame's mark, and it is watching. The ending is the only one that does not feel like a resolution. It feels like the beginning of something else. There is a golden line that appears in certain endings connecting the character to the Erd Tree. Players have analysed the specific trajectory of this line in each ending and noted that it enters the Erd Tree at a different point, depending on the ending. Whether this is compositional or meaningful is a genuinely open question. There are 2 secret items in the game that can only be found by jumping off a specific platform in Farum Azula and landing on a hidden ledge. The jump is not indicated in any way. Players who fell here by accident discovered it first, and players who followed their guides then replicated it intentionally. The community's discovery process is sometimes as interesting as the discovery itself. The entire eastern edge of the lands between map is ocean. You cannot reach it in most directions, but in one specific location on the coastline south of Limgrave, there is a stretch of beach where the water is shallow enough to walk in for a short distance. Players who found this have noted that it is one of the only points of genuine contact between the player and the ocean. There is a message on that beach that reads, "Try jumping. There is nothing to jump to. The ocean kills you almost immediately." Whether this is a player trolling or an in-game developer message that is genuinely curious about whether you will try, is exactly the kind of ambiguity Elden Ring is full of. The coloration of the ocean changes depending on the time of day and the weather system active when you observe it. At sunset, in certain weather conditions, The ocean turns a color that several players have described as unlike anything else in the game, a specific shade of orange gold that lasts only for a few minutes of in-game time. There are fog gates in the game that appear randomly in certain weather conditions and do not lead anywhere. They appear to be environmental, a visual phenomenon rather than a gameplay mechanic. Several players have spent considerable time attempting to interact with these fogs without success. The item called the Sora Seal, which increases attributes but also increases damage taken, is described in item lore as being a seal that was used to compress great power into a small vessel at the cost of the vessel's resilience. It is a piece of game balance implemented through lore logic, which is a design approach that Elden Ring uses consistently. There are rings in Elden Ring that appear as jewelry items with non-combat functions, described in their lore as having been created for social or ceremonial purposes in the Golden Order's court. They do nothing mechanically. They are pure flavor items with no use. This is one of the few things in the game that exists entirely for texture rather than function. The item called Shabriri's Woe, which draws enemy aggression toward the holder, is described as containing the madness of a specific person named Shabriri. Shabriri is described elsewhere in lore as a man whose eyes were eaten by the Frenzied Flame, who became a vessel for spreading madness, and who now exists as a name on an item and a recurring reference in other items. The madness status effect in the game, triggered by certain enemies and environments, causes a character to lose health and FP when it fully builds up. Its visual effect is a distortion of the screen that makes the world look wrong. This is one of the more effective status effects in the game, at creating genuine discomfort in the player. There is an area in Lanedale called the Forbidden Lands, adjacent to where the final dungeons begin. The grass there grows in a different direction than the wind is blowing, which several players have identified and noted as a visual glitch, or possibly an intentional detail suggesting that the physics of the area are slightly wrong. The enemies in the Elden Throne area, the innermost sanctum of the Erd Tree, are described in item lore as having chosen to remain inside and guard it voluntarily. They are not drafted soldiers, they are believers who stayed. This detail changes how fighting through them feels retroactively. There is a chandelier in the Erd Tree's interior that is made of golden light rather than physical material. It casts light, but has no candles, no oil, no physical light source. It is described in concept art notes as representing the Erd Tree's stored grace being radiated passively. The view from the very top of the Divine Tower of East Altus at sunrise in the game's weather cycle is described by multiple players as the most beautiful view in the game. It combines the position of the Erd Tree in the sky, the coloration of the dawn light, and the scale of the plateau visible below in a specific combination that the game presents for only a few minutes of real time. Returning to that tower at different times of day produces entirely different views. The visual design team clearly accounted for how the tower and its surroundings would look across all lighting conditions, not just the conditions most likely to be encountered during normal gameplay. The item, called the Fingerprint Stone Shield, has a description that describes it as having been shaped by the Formless Mother herself. Her fingerprints visible in the stone, it is one of the few items in the game that claims direct divine manufacture rather than divine inspiration. The Clean Rot armor set has a description that discusses the filtration materials woven into it in specific technical terms that mirror real-world descriptions of filtration systems. This level of technical specificity in armor description is unusual and reflects a degree of research that went into the game's world building. The Lightning Spear incantation is associated with Farum Azula's ancient dragon tradition, and specifically with Fortisax, a dragon who made a pact with Godwyn. Their friendship is one of the only examples in the game of a dragon and a human forming a genuine bond of mutual respect, rather than a relationship of domination or service. Fortisax remained near Godwyn's body after Godwyn's death, refusing to leave, attempting in his own way to fight off the spreading deathblight. His boss fight, which takes place in a dream space near Godwyn's actual location, reflects this, because you fight him in a representation of what he has been fighting endlessly since his friend died. The lich dragon form that Fortisax has taken, by the time you fight him, is the result of his long contact with death-adjacent energies. He is not corrupted in a negative sense. He has simply been changed by the grief and the environment. His attacks use both lightning and death energy, which reflects this combination. After defeating him, you receive a remembrance that describes the pact he made with Godwyn and the nature of their friendship. It is one of the few remembrances that is unambiguously about love and loyalty rather than power or ambition. There is a tree in the Weeping Peninsula that stands alone in a field and has grown in a shape that exactly frames the Erd tree when viewed from a specific angle. Whether this tree was placed or grew this way naturally within the game's procedural environment is something no one has confirmed. The Erd in Erd tree is derived from the Old English word for earth, making Erd tree literally an earth tree. This connects to mythological traditions of world trees like Yggdrasil, which is not a coincidence given from Software's acknowledged interest in Norse and other European mythologies. But the game combines these mythological roots with elements from Japanese, Indian, and Central Asian traditions in ways that create something that references all of them without being wholly any of them. This synthesis is one of the more deliberately accomplished aspects of the game's design. There is a small bird that appears on a cliff edge in Liurnia at a specific time of day that cannot be interacted with. It is simply a bird sitting on a cliff looking at the lake below. It appears in exactly one location. It does not appear at other times of day. The Carrier Manor has a spider hand enemy type that is genuinely disturbing to many players. These hands, large severed hands that walk on their fingers, appear to have no item description that fully explains their origin. They are simply there, in the manor, with no clear source. There is a ballroom in the Carrier Manor where these enemies appear to have been dancing before you arrived. The room's geometry is circular and clear in the centre, as though designed for movement. This is either a deliberate implication or a coincidence of architecture. The moonflower petals that Renala's followers scatter in her boss room collect on the floor over the course of the first phase fight. If you allow the fight to run long enough before collecting the floating students, the floor becomes covered in petals. This level of particle detail in a boss fight floor is more than the fight requires. There is an item called the Memory Stone that increases your memory slots for spells. Its description says it is made from a special stone found only in certain ruins associated with glintstone and sorcery. The stones are described as crystallized thought, which is either poetic or literal, given what we know about glintstone. The Crystal Sage's boss fight involves two sages, one real and one a phantom created by the real one. The phantom disappears when hit, and the real one can only be damaged when it is stationary. This mechanic mirrors the lore description of Crystallians, who use light refraction as both a combat technique and a form of communication. There are Crystallians in Celia, town of sorcery, in Caelid, who appear to be engaged in some kind of ceremony or ritual even as you fight them. Their behavior in this specific location is different from Crystallians elsewhere. Some players have described it as watching something interrupted rather than watching an attack. Celia is described in item lore as a town that was sealed in place, its inhabitants preserved mid-moment during a specific event. The event is connected to the rot, and to a character named Millicent, who is connected to Malenia through the Scarlet Valkyrie lineage. Millicent's questline is one of the longest and most emotionally complex in the game. She is a carrier of the Scarlet Rot, but has been given a prosthetic arm by a healer named Gowry that allows her to fight and live semi-normally. She is slowly being consumed, and knows it, and is trying to find meaning before it claims her fully. Gowry is revealed to not be what he appears. His support of Millicent has ulterior motives connected to his own ideology and his own relationship with the Rot. The revelation of this is timed to make you question every previous interaction with him retroactively. Millicent's ending, whether you help or betray her, leads to a specific item related to Malenia. Both endings are described by players as affecting in different ways. The help ending involves watching her continue alone, which is both a kind of victory and a kind of sadness. The betrayal ending involves fighting her, which is worse. The unalloyed gold needle given to Millicent and eventually returned to Malenia, connects Millicent's story to the final confrontation with Malenia in a material way. The item exists in both questlines simultaneously, travelling between them, linking them in a way that makes the game's web of stories feel designed rather than coincidental. There are two contested theories in the community about Millicent's true origin. One theory, supported by item descriptions, suggests she is one of Malenia's daughters, created from Malenia's own body. The other suggests she is simply a carrier who was found and treated by Gowry. The game provides enough evidence for both readings to be plausible. This deliberate ambiguity is something From Software cultivates. The lore is not designed to be solved, but to be considered. Multiple playthroughs are described by players as revealing new readings rather than confirming old ones, which is unusual for a narrative structure. There is a character named Vike who appears as a hostile invader in the world, and whose item lore describes him as a tarnished, who came very close to becoming Elden Lord before being driven to madness by the Frenzied Flame. His armor shows the marks of his fall. He is, in a sense, a preview of what your character could become. The Frenzied Flame prescription event, where you receive the three fingers mark, cannot be reversed without Miquella's needle. If you do not have the needle before triggering the event, you are locked out of all other endings in that playthrough. This is one of the most severe mechanical consequences of a lore-driven choice in the game. There is a message of white light visible through a specific window in the Church of Inhibition in Liurnia that cannot be reached. The church is associated with frenzied flame activity in the area. The white light is there regardless of weather or time of day, coming from no visible source within the church. Players have reported climbing every surface nearby, trying to get a better look at it. The invasion point near the Church of Inhibition is one of the most aggressive in the game, with festering bloody finger invasions happening with unusual frequency. Whether this is a deliberately higher spawn rate near Frenzied Flame territory or a mechanical coincidence is not confirmed. There is a graveyard in Limgrave with specific tombstones that have names carved on them. Most tombstone inscriptions in the game are generic. These particular ones have what appear to be actual names that do not correspond to any named character in the game. Whether they were placed by the art team as flavor, or whether they are references to specific people is unknown. The night sky changes during in-game events. After the Radahn festival is triggered, specific stars that were present before are no longer visible in the sky above Caelid. Players who thought to check the sky before and after the fight noted this difference. It suggests that the event's effect on the stars is physically reflected in the game world's astronomy. There are lanterns in certain dungeon areas that are still lit, hundreds of years after the last inhabitants left. These lanterns use a type of oil described in item lore as burning essentially forever, due to a sorcerer's compound in the oil. The visual effect of encountering lit lanterns in an otherwise dead dungeon is one of the stranger atmospheric details in the game. The elevator that takes you from the surface down to the Siofa River is a long ride, and the descent takes you through layers of rock and root that tell a story of deep time. The Erdtree's roots are visible extending down through the rock. They look wrong at that depth, too old, too large, as though the tree has been growing far longer than any history accounts for. The deep root depths area contains the clearest visual evidence of what is happening beneath the surface. The entirety of Godwyn's spreading body can be seen from certain vantage points. Enormous pale masses of flesh extending through the cavern. What is disturbing is how much of the underground it has already claimed. There is a figure visible in the distance, in the deep root depths, that looks like a silhouette of a person standing at the edge of the visible area. It does not move and cannot be reached. It appears to be simply standing there, watching, oriented in a direction that is not clearly explained by anything nearby. The Prince of Death's Throne boss fight at the end of the Deep Root Depths area is actually optional. You do not need to go to the Deep Root Depths at all for the main story. Players who find it are drawn by the Fear questline or by simple exploration. The fight and the area are reward enough without being required. Fear's questline culminating in this area produces an ending item that represents her ideological conclusion, her vision of what the world should be. Whether that vision is presented sympathetically or critically depends entirely on whether you have engaged with her questline or encountered her only as an obstacle. The lore of the Elden Ring, as a whole, suggests a world that is not particularly interested in simple good and evil. Every faction, every character, every divine entity in the game has a motivation that, when understood, is at least comprehensible, if not sympathetic. The game extends this understanding even to the things you are asked to destroy. The item called the Death Root is one of the most literally significant objects in the game. You find it throughout the world. Bring it to Garank, who eats it. The accumulation of Death Root in the world is described as a physical manifestation of the spreading death caused by Godwyn's body. Every piece you collect and deliver is in a small way addressing the problem, rather than just fighting its symptoms. There is a white-faced Fare at the beginning of the game who mocks you for being maidenless and sends you in a direction that is genuinely helpful, even if condescending. His questline, if pursued, takes you from this initial mockery through a series of increasingly dark tasks until you are actively working with Mog's faction. The Bloodfinger hunter Yura, who opposes the Bloodyfinger faction, is found defending players from Vike's invasion in a specific location. His presence there before any questline interaction is a casual act of heroism that most players experience but do not recognize as the start of a character arc. There is a dueling tradition in Elden Ring's multiplayer community that has developed entirely outside any formal in-game system. Players who want to duel use a specific spot near a specific grace, use specific emotes to indicate readiness, and follow unwritten rules about what is and is not acceptable in a duel. This tradition emerged from thousands of players independently agreeing on the same behavior. The lore of the Crucible, the early form of the Erd Tree from which Crucible Knights take their abilities, describes it as a state of divine potential before divine law. The Crucible incantations, which grow tails and horns and wings on your character, are accessing something that predates the Golden Order's restraint. There are areas in the game that appear to have been inhabited by children, based on the scale of furniture and items found there. These areas are not explicitly child-related in any item descriptions. The inference is visual and spatial, which is how many of the game's more disturbing implications are communicated. The Elden Ring's visual design team included artists with backgrounds in architecture, sculpture, and historical arms and armor. The level of detail in the designs of Elden Ring's weapons and armor reflects this, with pieces that would be technically feasible in a historical context rendered alongside pieces that are deliberately fantastical in a way that the contrast makes readable. The Malenia fight, by most accounts, requires more attempts from most players than any other fight in the game. The community has documented average attempt counts and the resulting learning curve. What is interesting about these documents is that players describe a specific shift, not from failure to success, but from confusion to understanding, that makes the fight feel fundamentally different. On the other side, there is a summon sign near the Malenia arena for a character named Millicent, which is narratively significant if you understand the connection between them. Millicent assists in the fight with Malenia in a way that reads as both absurd, given the power difference, and somehow right, given the emotional weight of their connection. The moment after defeating Malenia, before the death animation completes, her form is briefly still in a way that is distinct from other boss deaths. It is as if the game holds the image for a fraction longer. Whether this is technically intentional or a perceived effect of the emotional context of the fight is something players disagree about. There is a grace site called the Fog-Shrouded Lake that has a quality of ambient sound unlike other graces. The sound design includes a low hum that is present beneath the ambient nature sounds, described by players as something between wind and breathing. It has not been attributed to any specific in-game source. The game ends at a specific point that is narrative rather than geographical. You can travel back to every location in the game after the ending triggers, but the world is slightly different. Some NPCs are gone, some areas have new states. The game does not tell you that these changes have happened. You discover them. This post-completion state of the world is one of the more affecting parts of the game for completionist players, who return expecting the world to be as they left it, and find instead that something has ended for everyone in it, not just the player character. There are no credits in Elden Ring that play in a traditional sense during a first playthrough. The credits play at a specific trigger and can be skipped. If you choose not to skip, they scroll against a specific piece of music that is quieter than most of the game's soundtrack. Almost contemplative. The final image before the credits is the same empty landscape seen in the game's opening, now transformed by whatever ending you chose. The circularity of this image, the return to a beginning point after everything that has happened, is one of those design choices that reads as deliberate, no matter what level of narrative engagement you brought to the game. There is a cave in Limgrave called the Coastal Cave that contains a questline item very early in the game. Most players who enter it do so accidentally while exploring the coastline and find the quest item without knowing what it is for. Hours later, when the quest it belongs to becomes relevant, the memory of having already found the item in a context that seemed unimportant is its own small version of the game's larger structure. The game's world is full of these connective tissues, items found before their significance is known, characters glimpsed before they're understood, locations visited in the wrong order that gain meaning later. From Software has described this as intentional, a way of making the world feel coherent rather than linear. There is a millstone contraption in the windmill village in the Altus Plateau that when you arrive is being used in a festival. The villagers are celebrating by dancing around the millstone. The item lore for the area describes this as a sacrificial tradition that has continued despite the loss of its original purpose. The celebration looks festive and is described as horrifying. The celebrant enemies in this area are not immediately aggressive. They are dancing. If you enter the dance area, they attack, but they attack with the same festive energy they were dancing with, which creates a tonal dissonance that several players have described as one of the more disturbing tonal choices in the game. There is a musician among the celebrants who plays a horn instrument. If the musician is killed before the other celebrants, the remaining celebrants stop their attack animation briefly, as though the music that was driving them is gone. This is either a gameplay detail or a lore detail, or both. The Altus Plateau connects to the Forbidden Lands, which connect to the mountain tops, which connect to the consecrated snowfield, which is a hidden optional area that requires both halves of the Haligtree medallion. The snowfield is a blizzard-covered white expanse in which almost nothing is visible and in which many players have walked in circles trying to navigate. The consecrated snowfield's navigational difficulty is not a technical limitation. The game has excellent pathfinding tools. The blizzard that obscures the snowfield is a deliberate design choice. You are meant to struggle to see where you are going. The area is described in lore as a place where the boundary between the world and something else is thin. There are lights in the consecrated snowfield that appear in the distance and can be followed, but they move. Players who followed them reported being led in circles or to dangerous areas. Whether this is intentional game design, a visual glitch, or a lore-implied phenomenon is one of those questions the game leaves open. At the center of the snowfield is a village called Ordina, the liturgical town which is in a state of suspension similar to Celia. To progress through it, you must light 4 torches while being hunted by invisible assassins. The town itself, once the torches are lit, opens a passage to the Haligtree. The entrance to the Haligtree, through Ordina, once you see it, looks exactly like what it is, a teleporter inside a consecrated town, leading to a divine tree. The journey to get there is so disorienting that arriving at something that makes visual sense is its own kind of relief. The Haligtree's architecture is different from the Erdtree's. It is more organic, more incorporated into the tree's actual structure, as though the builders and the tree were growing together rather than the builders constructing something adjacent to the tree. This reflects Miquella's intention, for the Haligtree is a different kind of divine institution. There are carved inscriptions in the Haligtree's walls that, according to players who translated them, are variations on prayers and blessings that differ from the Golden Order's standard liturgy. Miquella apparently created his own liturgical tradition for the community he was building. The spirit of this liturgy, of a place genuinely trying to be inclusive and protective, makes the Haligtree's current state more affecting. Everything it was trying to be is dying around you as you walk through it. The community that gathered here, in hope, is now a community in decay. Loretta, Knight of the Halig Tree, is the boss that guards the Halig Tree's upper reaches. She is also found as a much earlier boss in the Carrion Manor, where a spectral version of her guards the entrance. The reappearance of her, now fully present rather than spectral, in the place she chose to defend, recontextualizes both fights. There are flowers throughout the Halig Tree that appear to be in the process of dying or turning. The visual transition from healthy golden-tinged flowers to the scarlet rot's characteristic reddish hues is captured in these flowers, which exist in an in-between state as the two processes compete. The very bottom of the Halig Tree, where Malenia waits, is called the Elfale Brace of the Halig Tree. It is the inner sanctum of everything Miquella built, and it is the most contaminated part. Whatever protective measures were in place were not sufficient to stop the rot from reaching the innermost spaces. The flower motif associated with Malenia, present in her armor, her attacks, and the lore of her blooming, is carried through the visual design of Elfale in a way that makes the area feel like it belongs to her now. The Halig Tree became Malenia's domain when Miquella was taken. There is a moment in the Malenia boss fight, after you have killed her and the death animation has completed, where a single petal falls from somewhere above the arena and drifts to the ground. It lands on the floor near her. This happens every time, regardless of how the fight ended. It is just a petal falling in the quiet after everything. You said, continue for an additional 8 hours, the same way, continue for an additional 8 hours the same way. 215. To Claude responded, there is a room in the Academy of Liurnia that contains a lectern with an open book still resting on it. There is a room in the Academy of Liurnia that contains a lectern with an open book still resting on it. The book cannot be read by the player. It is simply there, open, as though a lesson was being taught when everything stopped. The page it is open to is blank from the player's distance, but the detail of it being open rather than closed makes it feel like an interrupted moment rather than an abandoned one. The Academy's rooftops are accessible through a series of jumps that most players discover while exploring. The rooftops offer a view of Liurnia of the Lakes that is different from any other vantage point in the region, and they contain several optional items and a path that bypasses a significant portion of the interior. The fact that this bypass exists is a design choice that rewards curiosity without requiring it. There is a student in the academy who is still alive and not hostile, sitting at a desk in a corner of one of the upper rooms. He has a single line of dialogue about a lecture he was attending before things went wrong. If you speak to him multiple times, he does not have additional dialogue. He is simply a person who survived and does not know what to do next. The Glintstone Pebble, the most basic sorcery in the game, is described in its item text as the first spell taught to every student at the academy. It is also described as deceptively capable in skilled hands, which is supported by the gameplay fact that a fully upgraded sorcerer build can use it very effectively. The game rewards mastery of simple tools. There is a room in the academy called the Debate Parlor. It is a large circular space with tiered seating and a central floor, clearly designed for formal argumentation. The debate, that was presumably ongoing when the academy fell, is permanently unresolved. The enemy there, the Red Wolf of Radagon, was apparently not part of the debate originally. The Red Wolf of Radagon is described in lore as a magical construct that embodies Radagon's military will. It is not a pet or an animal companion. It is a weaponized thought, given form, which is consistent with the Academy's philosophy that sorcery is primarily an intellectual discipline. There are cruciform shapes built into the stone of Liurnia's floors that predate the current Academy structure. This suggests the building was constructed on or within an older site that had different religious significance. The cruciform pattern is associated with a pre-Erdtree belief system that appears elsewhere in the game. The magic seal used to enter the academy, the Glintstone Key, has a description noting that the sealing magic was designed specifically to keep the uninitiated out, rather than to keep anything in. The distinction is important because it suggests that whatever is inside the academy is not considered dangerous so much as exclusive. The illusory floor in the academy that drops you into a dungeon beneath it is one of the game's hidden passages, but the dungeon beneath it contains the Red Wolf and eventually connects back to a site of grace outside the main building, suggesting the dungeon predates the academy proper and was simply incorporated into its structure. The Crystallian enemies in the academy do not bleed and do not react normally to most damage types. They must be struck with blunt force to be effective against. This mechanic mirrors the description of crystalline material in item lore, which describes it as a substance that redirects energy rather than absorbing it. There is a Crystallian in a specific room who appears to be meditating. Its posture and the arrangement of smaller crystals around it suggest a ritual or contemplative practice rather than a combat position. If you attack it without warning, it responds immediately and aggressively. If you approach slowly, the transition to aggression is slightly delayed. The item called the Crystallographer's Tools, found in the Academy, has a description that details a very specific and technical set of processes for working with glintstone. The description is precise enough that several players have noted it reads like an actual crafting manual rather than flavor text. The memory of grace that appears near the grace of gold in certain areas is a visual phenomenon that lasts only a moment when you first arrive. It is described in concept art as representing the historical imprint of the grace site's most significant use. Most players see it and think it is a loading artifact. It is not. There is a merchant in the Ainsel River area who speaks in riddles and sells specific items related to the moon and to sorcery. His backstory is contained entirely in a single item he gives you, rather than in his dialogue, and the item description reveals that he is far more significant than his appearance suggests. The Ainsel River itself is described in lore as having once been a river of starlight that flowed underground, connecting the eternal cities. The water in the current game is not starlight. Whatever made it luminous has faded, but the riverbed contains formations that still catch light in ways suggesting the old luminescence. The miniature Ranni doll, which you receive during Ranni's questline, can be talked to at sites of grace. For most of the questline, it does not respond. Then, at a specific point in the story, it begins to speak. The transition from silence to speech is not flagged by any notification. Players who talk to the doll repeatedly throughout their journey discovered this, while players who stopped trying missed it. Ranni's voice coming from the doll is slightly different from Ranni's voice when you speak to her in person. Whether this is a technical difference in recording or a deliberate artistic choice to suggest that communication through the doll is imperfect is something players have debated. There is a piece of environmental storytelling in the Ainsel River that involves a group of ant enemies gathered around what appears to be an offering. The ants in the game are described as having a hive consciousness and a specific relationship with Malenia and the rot. The offering they are gathered around is not clearly identifiable. The claimant enemies in the underground areas are described as having been formed from the clay of the underground regions, shaped by the same forces that built the eternal cities. They are not quite living and not quite constructed. Their behavior is passive and less disturbed, which matches the description of unfinished or dormant things. There is a sleeping claimant in a corner of the Siofra River area that breathes visibly. Its chest rises and falls. None of the other claimant in the area appear to breathe in the same way. Whether this individual is alive in a way the others are not, or whether the breathing is a visual artifact, is not something any item lore addresses. The Lake of Rot is one of the most visually striking and mechanically punishing areas in the game. An enormous expanse of scarlet rot covers everything, and moving through it rapidly builds the rot status effect. The visual design of the lake, its color, and the way things protrude from its surface makes it feel genuinely hostile in a way that goes beyond the mechanical danger. There are columns and structures partially submerged in the Lake of Rot that suggest it was once a different kind of space, possibly a functioning floor of an underground city before the rot submerged it. Following the tops of these structures allows you to cross the lake with slightly less contact with the rot. At the center of the Lake of Rot is a mechanism that temporarily drains portions of it, revealing the floor beneath. The floor contains passages and items, Using the mechanism correctly is one of the more satisfying environmental puzzle solutions in the game, and the moment when the lake drains and reveals what was hidden is visually impressive. The grand cloister at the edge of the Lake of Rot contains a coffin that you must rest in to be carried by the current to a new area. This is one of the stranger transition mechanics in the game. You lie down in a coffin, and the river takes you somewhere. The area you arrive at is beneath the deepest underground regions, suggesting that resting in the coffin is a kind of symbolic death. The thing waiting at the end of that coffin journey is Astel, natural born of the void, one of the alien entities mentioned earlier. The approach to the boss, through a cave littered with the debris of what the Astel landed on, or destroyed when it arrived, is one of the more deliberately paced approaching sequences in the game. The second Astel, Stars of Darkness, is found in a completely different underground location reached through the Mogwin area. The two Astels have slightly different attacks and different visual coloration. This reinforces the reading that they are natural phenomena rather than unique beings. The same way two tornadoes are the same kind of thing, but not the same specific event. The Valiant Gargoyle boss fight in the Siofra Aqueduct is a two-phase fight, where a second gargoyle joins partway through. The gargoyles are described as divine constructs that have been standing guard over the aqueduct for so long that they are weathered and partially broken. Their aggression is automatic, a function that has continued past any relevant purpose. The aqueduct itself is an engineering achievement described in environmental detail. Enormous stone channels that once carried water from an unknown source to the eternal cities. The scale of the infrastructure suggests a civilization of significant sophistication that predated any of the cultures currently described in item lore. There is a staircase in the deep-root depths that descends further than any other staircase in the game. Following it requires patience and the expectation of nothing at the bottom, which most players do not bring. Those who follow it to the end find a specific item that suggests someone built the staircase to go to that exact place for a specific reason. The Fear questline in the Deep-Root Depths requires you to defeat a hostile version of D, the Hunter of the Dead. This version has been given a weapon by Fear and asked to do something. The interaction between questline logic and combat here is one of the cleanest examples of Elden Ring's approach to making story beats into encounters. After defeating this hostile version of D, Fear expresses gratitude and eventually reveals more of her plan and backstory. The things she reveals in this part of the questline change the context of every previous interaction with her. She is not naive. She has always known what she was working toward. The Prince of Death's throne fight, at the culmination of this questline, is fought against a version of Fear that has transformed. She has achieved what she was attempting. Whether this transformation is a corruption or a fulfillment is the central question the fight asks you to engage with through the act of stopping her. If you do stop her, you receive the mending rune of the Death Prince, which enables a specific ending. But you could also choose not to complete her questline and never know it existed. The ending she enables is one of the more ambiguous ones, and its existence as an option shapes how you think about the Golden Order's relationship to death and rest. The soundscape of the Deep-Root Depths is unlike any other area. There is a deep resonance that seems to come from the rock itself, rather than from any identifiable source. Players who used headphones have described it as feeling physical, a vibration rather than a sound. There is a painting in the Deep-Root Depths that depicts a sky. The Deep-Root Depths has no sky. The painting is of a blue expanse with clouds, presumably a memory of, or aspiration toward, a surface world that whoever lived here could not access. The painting is old. The paint is described in nearby item lore as having been mixed with Erd Tree Amber to prevent fading. The Erd Tree avatars that guard specific sites of grace in the overworld are enormous walking tree structures described as manifestations of the Erd Tree's will to protect its sacred sites. They move slowly and have large attack ranges and are optional in almost every case. Many players avoid them entirely, but defeating them rewards Erd Tree-related items that are used to strengthen spirit ashes. There is an Erd Tree avatar in Caelid that has a partially rotted appearance, distinguishing it from the healthy-looking avatars in other regions. The rot has affected even the Erd tree's protective presence in Caelid, which is significant, given that the Erd tree is supposed to represent the Golden Order's power over decay. The falling star beasts are spider-like creatures that descend from the sky in some areas and emerge from craters in others. They are described as being formed from the void of space, taking on a physical form when they land. Their behavior, which involves digging into the earth and returning to the sky, suggests they are transient presences rather than permanent inhabitants. There is a falling star beast at the top of a very tall tower in Mount Gelmir. Reaching this tower requires navigating one of the game's most complex optional paths. The reward for defeating the beast there is significant. But more than the reward, the view from the top of that tower before the fight is one of the most complete views of the Western Lands Between, available anywhere. Mount Gelmir itself is a volcanic region, accessed through the Altus Plateau. Its geography includes active magma flows and an enormous cliff from which the Erd tree is visible in a specific way, showing its scale relative to the surrounding landscape more clearly than from lower elevations. The full-grown falling star beast boss, in a caldera in Mount Gelmir, is the largest variant of this enemy type. Its item description suggests that falling stars grow as they spend more time in the physical world, which makes the size of this one an indication of how long it has been present. The specific time frame is never stated. There is a cave system beneath Mount Gelmir that connects to the volcano manor without going through the visible above-ground path. Players who find this connection discover it as a surprise, entering what appeared to be a dead-end cave and finding themselves in the manor's basement. The transition is one of the game's more unexpected moments of spatial revelation. The Volcano Manor has a specific room that is the personal quarters of Tanith. The room contains items that characterize her as a person rather than just a faction leader, including a specific piece of headwear and a note that implies a history with Rykard that predates the game. None of this is shown in her dialogue. It is entirely environmental. Rykard's domain within the Volcano Manor includes an enormous pool of magma in which an enormous serpent is visible before you trigger the boss fight. The serpent has been there long enough to be described as part of the landscape by NPCs in the manor. It is not hiding. It is simply waiting. The Bloodhound Knight, Darrywell, is an optional boss found in the Forlorn Hound Evergale, a type of magical prison scattered throughout the lands between. Evergales are described as prisons that hold enemies of the Golden Order in a suspended state. Darrywell attacked a finger maiden according to his item lore, which is why he was imprisoned. Blade's questline involves you finding and defeating Darrywell on Blade's behalf. When you do, Blade appears after the fight and thanks you in a way that is casual and genuine, as though the confrontation was something he had been wanting to deal with for a long time. The conversation after the fight establishes his personality more clearly than any other moment in his arc. There are 6 Evergales in the game, each containing a different imprisoned figure. The things they did to earn imprisonment range from acts of war to acts of worship to acts of personal violence. The variety suggests that the Golden Order imprisoned a wide range of perceived threats, not just warriors. One Evergale contains a Godskin apostle, suggesting that the Godskin practitioners were being suppressed by the Golden Order before the shattering disrupted everything. Another contains a sorcerer whose specific crime is described in terms that suggest intellectual heresy rather than physical violence. The imprisoned sorcerer believed something that the Golden Order found dangerous. There is an Evergale on the Weeping Peninsula that contains Bolse, a Carrion Knight. He is large, gentle-seeming in his animation, and fights with a magic staff. His item lore describes him as having been captured during a conflict between the Carrion royal family and the Golden Order, making his imprisonment a political act, rather than a criminal one. The Elden Ring's use of Evergales as a mechanic reflects a specific philosophy about imprisonment in this world. The prisoners are not dead, they are not stored in cells. They are frozen in a suspended space where time does not pass, kept there for as long as the seal holds. The seal holds until the player breaks it. This means that every Evergale you open is releasing something that has been in suspension for what may be hundreds of years. The prisoner does not experience this gap. For them, they are simply continuing from the moment they were imprisoned, which explains why they are so immediately aggressive. No time has passed for them. There is a message, sometimes found near Evergale entrances, that reads, "Be wary of resurrection." This is player-placed, not developer-placed, but it captures the implication of Evergale release accurately enough that many players have described it as feeling like in-world advice. The Bloodhound Claws weapon found in an underground area has a description that references the Bloodhound Knight faction more broadly, describing them as warriors who traded their humanity for enhanced hunting senses. The transformation is described as voluntary and as part of a specific tradition associated with a noble house that no longer exists. There is a Bloodhound Knight in the Volcano Manor who is not hostile unless attacked. He patrols a specific corridor with focused purpose, moving back and forth without acknowledging the player. Several players have speculated that he is still fulfilling a function that predates the manor's current use. The knight's cavalry enemies that appear only at night in the overworld are described as spectral knights who ride endlessly until dawn. Their routes take them along specific roads that were historically significant, and in several cases their routes pass directly in front of ruins that appear to have been important places in those roads' histories. There is a knight's cavalry boss that drops a particularly significant piece of armor that cannot be found anywhere else. Players who know it exists often farm the encounter multiple times to get the drop. The armor's item description connects it to a specific period of the Lands Between's history that predates anything shown in the game. The spectral nature of the knight's cavalry means they cannot be knocked off their horses and cannot be stunned by normal means. They also leave a specific type of vapor trail when they ride, which is visible from a distance and can be used to locate them before they are close enough to pose a threat. The morning after encountering Knight's cavalry on a first playthrough, when dawn comes and they disappear, several players have reported a sense of relief that is as much atmospheric as practical. The way the game handles the day-night cycle makes the transition genuinely feel like a change in the world rather than a cosmetic shift. There are flowers in Limgrave that open during the day and close at night. This level of botanical simulation is not mechanically relevant, but contributes to the sense that the world has its own rhythms, independent of the player's presence. The grace of gold that appears on maps grows in density near sites of grace. At the edge of the known world, it fades entirely. This visual detail suggests that grace is concentrated near the things it cares about, which raises the question of what it cares about and why it chooses the places it does. There is a body near a cliff in Liurnia that is sitting in a position suggesting someone chose that spot deliberately to look at the lake. They have been dead long enough to be skeletal. There is no item near them and no explanation. They simply sat somewhere they found beautiful and at some point stopped. The glintstone crown helmets available in the game each have different designs and different lore descriptions. Some are associated with specific faculty members of the academy. Some are associated with student ranks. Wearing different crowns changes the dialogue of certain NPCs in the academy slightly, suggesting the crowns are still being read as rank indicators even in the academy's ruined state. There is a helmet in the game called the albinauric mask that grants the ability to pass through certain areas of the game that are hostile to Tarnished, without triggering combat. This mechanic is not explained by any in-game tutorial. Players who found it discovered it by wearing the mask in an area where they expected a fight and found that no fight came. The albinaurics, who react differently to the mask, include specific NPCs whose dialogue changes when they believe you are one of them. The dialogue they offer in this state is different from what they say to a recognized Tarnished and provides information about their community and experience that is not otherwise available. There is a questline involving an albinauric named Seluvis that technically overlaps with other questlines in a way that requires careful navigation to complete all of them. The overlap is not mentioned by any NPC. Players who attempt to complete everything in a single playthrough frequently find that one questline has locked another. The game's questlines occasionally fail silently. An NPC will simply be gone, or a next step will not be available, without any explanation. This has been criticized and also defended as consistent with a world that does not stop for you. Things happen whether or not you engage with them in time. There is an NPC named Dialos who appears in multiple locations across the game and who is searching for a specific person. His questline ends differently depending on specific choices and timing. If you arrive at certain locations after too much time has passed, the questline has already concluded without you. Dialos is simply gone. The character called the Dung Eater is found in the Round Table Hold and has one of the most deliberately repellent presences of any NPC in the game. His questline involves collecting items related to his specific and disturbing ideology. His name, his appearance, and his goals are all designed to make the player uncomfortable engaging with his questline. The Mending Rune he offers enables an ending described as cursing every person born in the lands between, henceforth with a specific corruption. This ending is presented without the narrative framing that would make it either clearly heroic or clearly villainous, which is consistent with the game's general approach to moral ambiguity. Whether the Dung Eater's ending is worse than, equivalent to, or somehow more honest than the other endings is a question that the player is left to answer alone. Several players who engaged deeply with the game's lore have argued that his ending is paradoxically one of the more internally consistent ones. From a specific ideological framework, there is a specific chest in the Round Table Hold that can only be opened after a specific event in the game. Inside it are items that connect to a story beat most players have already passed by the time they can open the chest. The sequencing creates a retrospective effect, where you receive information about something that happened before you understood it was happening. The bell-bearing hunters that invade when you attempt to use a site of grace in the early morning hours of the in-game day are one of the more unexpected encounters in the game. Their pattern of appearing only at specific times makes them something some players never encounter, and others encounter without understanding why they appeared. Their lore describes them as entities that enforce the rules of trade and exchange, ensuring that those who die do not take their goods beyond the living world. They are, in a sense, the enforcers of the bell-bearing system, hunting those who have accumulated without dying. There is a ghost that appears at the Church of Inhibition during a madness-inflicting event that can kill you without any enemy being present. The ghost is not the source of the madness. It is simply present, watching, as the event occurs. Its presence during the event suggests some connection to the Frenzied Flame activity in the area. The Three Fingers. Appearance is deliberately contrasted with the Two Fingers. The Two Fingers are pale and careful, existing in a sealed room in an established institution. The Three Fingers are in the dark beneath the city, accessible only through deliberate stripping away of everything you carry. The contrast is physical, spatial, and thematic. There is a cathedral in the Altus Plateau, called the Perfumer's Grotto, that is hidden beneath an overhang and not visible on the map until you enter it. Inside are perfumer enemies and a boss. The grotto is connected to the same noble court tradition as the perfumers mentioned earlier, described as a place where alchemical arts were developed in private. The incantations available through the dragon communion system are described as requiring the literal consumption of a dragon's essence. Using these incantations causes your character to visually transform, growing draconic features during the attack. The transformation is temporary, but the description of it as consumption is persistent across all the spell descriptions. This consumption framing mirrors the Godskin practitioners' practice in reverse. Where the Godskin practitioners take the skin of gods, the Dragon Communion practitioners consume the heart and essence of dragons. Both are described as acquiring power through intimate contact with a powerful being's mortality. There is a church in Caelid called the Church of the Plague that contains an Erd Tree avatar already affected by the rot. The church was presumably built to the Erd Tree's glory and now contains an avatar of that same power visibly corrupted by the rot that surrounds it. The visual of a holy guardian site, corrupted by the very thing the nearby faith community might have prayed against, is not commented on by any NPC. The Nomadic Warrior's Cookbook, found in various locations, contains recipes developed by the nomadic traders who travel between the regions of the lands between. Their trade routes are implied by where the cookbooks are found, sketching a map of movement through the game world that doesn't appear on the actual map. There is a specific nomadic merchant near the Siofra River wellspring who sells a unique item available nowhere else. Players who miss him miss that item entirely, and since his location requires a specific path not indicated by any quest marker or dialogue, many players complete the game without ever encountering him. The nomadic merchants across the game are all connected, described in their lore as belonging to a single extended family or tradition. Their personal names are not provided, they refer to themselves only in their role. Whether this is a cultural practice or an imposed condition is something item descriptions suggest without resolving. There is a moment in the game where a merchant who has been selling you things throughout the early portion of the game is found dead. No explanation is given. No enemy is nearby. The bell bearing is simply there. Players who had developed an attachment to that merchant through repeated transactions have described this moment as unexpectedly affecting. The twin maiden husks react to receiving the specific merchant's bell, bearing with a line of dialogue that is different from their reaction to other bell bearings. It is brief, but it suggests that they have a record of the merchants, and that this one's absence is noted, if not mourned. There is a tree in the Altus Plateau whose roots extend into a small cave below it. Inside the cave is a site of grace and an item. The cave has no enemies. It is simply a hidden space of quiet inside an otherwise active region. Players who find it often sit at the grace for a moment before moving on. There are hidden passages in the game that are indicated not by any visual marker, but by the behavior of enemies. In several cases, an enemy patrol's route takes it through a wall that turns out to be illusory. Following an enemy through its patrol route revealed multiple hidden passages to players who noticed the behavior. The rune bears found in Limgrave and other areas are among the most disproportionately powerful enemies in the early game. They are described in item lore as creatures that have absorbed so many runes from their environment that the runes have become part of their biology. This is why killing them yields an unusually high rune count. There is a rune bear in a specific location in Limgrave that is sitting down when you first encounter it and does not notice you at a normal approach distance. It only becomes aggressive when you are very close. Players who noticed it sitting down and chose to watch it for a moment before engaging have described it as looking from a distance like it is resting. The black bears in Dragon Barrow are similar but larger and more aggressive. They are described as the same species as rune bears, but having absorbed different energies from the Dragon Barrow region, making them distinct in behavior and power level. The item lore describes the difference as environmental rather than genetic. There is a giant crab enemy in the coastal areas of Limgrave that is so large it serves as a local landmark. Players who use it as a navigation reference have noted that its patrol route takes it in a consistent circle that, if followed, eventually brings it back to a specific rock formation near the coast every time. The giant land octopus enemies found in Liurnia and other areas are described as creatures that migrated from the ocean after the flooding that created Liurnia's current geography. They are not originally from the lake they are found in. The flooding brought conditions suitable for them, and they followed. There is an octopus enemy in a cave in Liurnia that is positioned in front of a painting. The painting depicts the ocean, whether the octopus is drawn to the painting for any reason, or whether its position is coincidental within the cave's layout, is one of those small environmental observations that the game leaves to the player's interpretation. The enemies, called worm faces, are found in the Altus Plateau and the mountain tops. They are described as humans who were transformed by proximity to death energies associated with Godwin. Their faces have been replaced by pale, writhing things that function similarly to sensory organs, but are visually unlike anything that should be on a human face. There are worm faces in a location that also contains a note written by a person who is in the early stages of transformation, describing what they feel and fear as it progresses. The note ends mid-sentence. The worm face nearby may or may not be the note's author. The proximity is close enough to suggest it. There is a location in the mountain tops where multiple worm faces are gathered around a central formation of deathroot. They are not aggressive to each other and appear to exist in a kind of community, or at least proximity. Whether they retain any awareness of their former identities is not addressed in the lore. The deathbird near the Stargazer's ruins in the mountain tops has a specific behavior of circling the ruins before landing, which other deathbirds do not exhibit. The ruins are described as having been used to observe the stars, which are connected to the same divine systems as the deathbirds. Whether the circling is responsive to the ruins or coincidental to its patrol route is not stated. The Stargazer's ruins themselves contain telescopes or instruments oriented towards specific positions in the sky. Players who have tracked the orientations and mapped them against the in-game night sky have found that the instruments are aimed at stars that are meaningful in the game's cosmology. Whether this is deliberate placement by the development team has not been confirmed. There is a corpse at one of the telescopes in the Stargazer's ruins that is positioned as though the person died while observing, their eyes still at the instrument. The detail of how the body fell, backwards slightly as though startled, suggests they saw something when they died, but what it was is not addressed. The Zamor ruins in the mountain tops contain evidence of a civilization that predates the Golden Order. Their architecture and the items found within are different from anything associated with the Erdtree's culture. The Zamor Knights, who guard the ruins, are described as warriors of this ancient civilization, preserved or revived in some form to defend their people's legacy. There is a specific combination of items from the Zamor culture that, when their descriptions are read together, construct a partial history of that civilization, their beliefs, their fall, and their relationship with the giants. No single item contains the full picture. The information is distributed across 4 items that must be read in conjunction. This distributive approach to lore is one of the most consistent design principles in Elden Ring. No single source tells you everything. The full picture requires synthesis across multiple items, dialogues, and environmental observations. Players who engage with all of these feel like researchers who have assembled something, rather than readers who have received something. The Forge of the Giants is not just a location, but a concept in the game's cosmology. The description of the Forge as the place where the giants kept the flame that was stolen implies a civilization advanced enough to maintain and contain a divine flame for practical use. The Forge predates the Erdtree civilization by an unspecified but implied enormous duration. There is a giant who is chained near the entrance to the Forge area, who is already dead when you arrive. His size and the specific nature of the chain binding him are different from the fire giant boss. He appears to be a different individual, chained in the same location as the living one, which suggests that the practice of chaining giants here has happened before. The path leading to the fire giant boss fight crosses a bridge covered in the remains of previous challenges. The items found among these remains describe the individuals who carried them. Several of these descriptions suggest the individuals were powerful and well prepared, which contextualizes the fire giant as something that has defeated the world's best repeatedly. The fire giants' 2 health bars, one for each phase of the fight, are indicated on screen, but the gap between them is not marked. Players who think they are winning when they deplete what appears to be most of the health are surprised when the second phase begins with a full new bar. This is a deliberate design choice, intended to prevent the fight from feeling routine. The visual effect, when the fire giant tears free of his legs and begins the second phase, is one of the most dramatic moment-to-moment changes in any boss fight. The camera pulls back, the arena's perceived geometry changes because the enemy is no longer standing, and the relationship between the player and the boss shifts entirely. You are no longer fighting something in front of you. You are fighting something that is everywhere. There is a pair of footprints in the snow near the first step that belong to an unknown creature. They do not match the footprint patterns of any enemy or NPC in the game. They lead to a cliff edge and stop. Several players have noted them and been unable to identify their source. The snow that falls in the mountaintops region has physics that are slightly different from rain. It accumulates on surfaces over time and shifts the visual appearance of the environment. Players who spend significant time in the region without fast traveling have noted that the landscape looks different after an extended period than it did when they arrived. There is a shack in the mountaintops that contains an NPC who will only give you a meaningful response after you have completed a specific earlier quest line. Before that point, she says very little. The condition is not signaled by any in-game prompt. Players who complete the quest line and return find that a character who seemed irrelevant becomes suddenly important. The Elden Star's incantation is described as the most ancient of the Golden Order's spells, derived from a time before the current age. Its description suggests that the stars themselves respond to a specific arrangement of prayer, and that this arrangement was discovered rather than invented by the first believers of the Golden Order. There is an incantation called the Flame of Frenzy that is associated with the three fingers and produces yellow fire. This fire deals damage to both the target and the caster, and its item description states that the flame seeks to consume everything equally, which is a philosophical position expressed as a game mechanic. The lightning incantations associated with Farum Azula's dragon tradition include one called Ancient Dragon's Lightning Strike, that summons bolts from a storm that does not appear to originate in the game world's sky. The lightning comes from somewhere else, which is consistent with the law that Farum Azula itself exists in a time outside normal time. There is an incantation called Dragon Bolt Blessing that does not deal damage, but instead enhances the user's resistance. Its description says it was used by the ancient dragon warriors to prepare for combat, and that using it now is an act of connection to a tradition that no longer formally exists. The Crucible incantations, which grow aspects of the original Crucible form on the player, have a visual persistence. After casting, the tail or horn or wing grown by the spell lingers for a moment after the spell's effect ends, visible as it fades. This fade animation is more detailed than most spell visual effects and suggests the growth being retracted rather than simply disappeared. There is a Crucible incantation called Aspects of the Crucible, horns that causes the player to charge forward and then produce horns for a follow-up attack. In co-op play, other players can see the horns on your character as you use the spell, which creates a shared visual experience not available when playing solo. The Frenzied Burst incantation, associated with the Frenzied Flame, is described as firing a concentrated beam of frenzied light with extreme range. Its description notes that the range exists because madness does not diminish with distance. This is a philosophical statement presented as a justification for a game balance decision. There is an incantation called Pest Threads that fires threads of spider silk at enemies. It is associated with a minor deity, described in item lore as existing in the spaces between the major divine powers. The deity has no name and no further presence in the game's lore. It exists only as the source of this one spell. The Black Blade incantation, derived from Maliketh's power, deals damage over time that cannot be healed from. Its description says the damage is the removal of life by the Rune of Death, which is lore accurate in that it inverts the normal healing available to players and NPCs in the lands between. It is mechanically interesting because it directly engages with the cosmology's rules about death. There is an incantation called the Golden Vow that increases attack and defense for the caster and allies. Its description references a specific vow made by a specific warrior and describes the strength of the vow persisting in the spell's effect. The warrior referenced is not named. The vow's content is not stated. The strength it produces is the most concrete thing about it. The Prophet class in the game begins with incantation-based spells and a specific visual identity. Its starting armor is tattered and humble. The Prophet is described as a wanderer who interprets visions and omens, which is a role separate from any of the established divine institutions. The class frames itself as someone who sees things that institutions have not authorized. There is a Prophet NPC who appears early in the game in a specific location and makes a prophecy about the player's journey. The prophecy is vague enough to apply to almost any interpretation of what happens in the game, but players who revisit it after completing the game have found specific elements that connect to specific events with surprising precision. The hero class begins with higher strength than any other class, and a specific weapon that is described as the legacy of a certain lineage. The weapon's item description hints at a backstory for the hero that is more elaborate than any class description typically provides. suggesting a specific identity that the player inherits rather than creates. The class, called the Wretch, begins with no armor, a club, and the lowest stats of any starting class. Its description is a single sentence, describing it as one who has lost everything. Players who choose this class are accepting the hardest start in the game. Many describe the choice as a way of ensuring that every piece of armor and every weapon upgrade feels earned. The Prisoner class wears an iron helm that covers half the face and begins with both sorcery and physical combat abilities. The lore attached to the Prisoner is that they are a sorcerer who was condemned for practicing forbidden magic, and who has retained their knowledge despite imprisonment. The helm, still worn, is a reminder of what they were accused of. There is a starting keepsake called the Stone Sword Key that opens specific fog walls called imp statues throughout the game. The fog walls sealed by these statues are often in front of optional areas and optional items. The early provision of one Stone Sword Key is an invitation to seek out and explore rather than progress linearly. The Bewitching Branch is a starting keepsake option, described as having been made from a branch of Miquella's halig tree. It can be used on enemies to temporarily turn them into allies. Its description notes that the effect is a fraction of Miquella's original power, which suggests what a complete expression of that power might have looked like. There is a keepsake, called the Cracked Pot, that seems like the most mundane option, but is actually one of the more useful starting items. It is used in crafting throwable items, and having one from the start expands the player's crafting options earlier than most players would otherwise encounter them. Players who choose it often do not appreciate its value until later in the game. The Lantern starting keepsake is a light source that can be equipped in the offhand to illuminate dark areas without requiring a torch. Its item description is brief and practical. Players who choose it for its utility in dark areas often note that it changes how they experience cave systems throughout the game. There is a cave in Limgrave, near the coast, called the Murkwater Catacombs, that is one of the earliest dungeons accessible to players. It is small and not particularly rewarding compared to later dungeons, but several players have described it as where they first understood what the catacomb dungeons were, both structurally and atmospherically. The catacombs throughout the game share a specific visual language: stone corridors, blue flames in sconces, skeletal enemies, and a specific sense of depth below the surface. This visual language is consistent enough that experienced players can recognize a catacomb from a short distance, which creates a specific set of expectations that the game occasionally subverts. There is a catacomb in the Atlas Plateau called the Sainted Hero's Grave that is dramatically larger than most catacombs and contains enemies of a significantly higher level than the exterior would suggest. Players who enter it expecting a standard catacomb experience frequently describe being surprised by its scale. The hero graves throughout the game contain the graves of significant warriors who died before the events of the game. The enemies within them are often described as representations of the hero's strength, or tests appropriate to the hero's legacy. Defeating the boss within a hero's grave is framed as proving yourself worthy of what the hero left behind. There is a specific hero grave in Caelid, whose boss drops a remembrance that includes a description of the hero's death in a battle with a dragon. The description is told from the hero's perspective and ends at the moment of the killing blow, giving the reader the hero's last sensory experience without resolution. The imp enemies found in catacombs are small, energetic creatures that attack in groups and are described as being created specifically for the purpose of guarding burial sites. Their aggression is a function, not a temperament. Several players have noted that the imps seem almost playful in their movement, which creates tonal contrast with the seriousness of what they are guarding. There is an imp in a specific catacomb who is sitting on top of a sarcophagus and is not aggressive. It watches you as you explore, turning to follow your movement without approaching. If you attack it, it becomes aggressive. If you do not, it simply watches. No item lore addresses this specific individual's behavior. The Glintblade Phalanx sorcery creates a ring of spectral daggers that orbit the caster and fire automatically at nearby enemies. Its description says The pattern was modelled on the formation of a specific constellation, and the visual arrangement of the daggers does match a specific star pattern visible in the night sky above Liurnia. There is a sorcery called the Loretta's Great Bow that fires an enormous spectral great bow arrow. It is associated with Loretta and can be learned by defeating her. The size of the arrow and the power of the spell suggest that the weapon Loretta uses, while visually a standard great bow in her hands, is operating on a scale beyond the physical. The Comet Azure sorcery, one of the most famous and most powerful in the game, requires a specific gesture and a full commitment of concentration while casting. Players who use it in boss fights must plan around its limitations, finding specific windows where the boss is stationary long enough for the beam to do significant damage. Several players have described discovering the first opportunity for this in a difficult boss fight as one of the most satisfying moments in the game. There is an incantation called the Litany of Proper Death that is described as the final prayer of a tradition that attempted to formalize the relationship between the living and the dead. Its description says the prayer was written by someone who knew it would never be answered by the entities it addressed, but wrote it anyway. The Golden Order seal and Clawmark seal are two different casting implements that boost different types of incantations. Their descriptions reflect the theological difference between them. One rooted in the bestial faith's more primal approach. Using the same spell through different seals does not change the spell's visual effect, but changes the numerical performance, which is a way of saying that what you believe in shapes the power of what you do. There is a spell called the Stars of Ruin that fires 12 shooting stars at a target. The description says the spell was derived from the study of the star cluster that was the source of a specific ancient calamity. Each star fired is described as a fragment of that cluster's original violence, preserved in the sorcery form. The Founding Reign of Stars sorcery creates falling stars from above in a sustained area effect. Its description says it recreates a natural phenomenon from the beginning of the world, a time when stars fell as rain before anything had grown to intercept them. Using it is described as accessing a geological memory rather than a divine power. There is a sorcery called the Ranni's Dark Moon that is the more powerful version of Rennala's full moon. Its description connects it to Ranni's ideology of independence from the Golden Order, and notes that the moon Ranni claims is not the moon of the current age. Her moon is described as older, darker, and belonging to a different kind of sovereignty. The visual difference between Rennala's full moon and Ranni's dark moon is colour. Rennala's is pale silver, Ranni's is deep blue-black, with a different type of trailing effect. Players who use both have noted that the dark moon version creates a silence in the area it passes through, reducing ambient sound briefly, which is not explained by any item description. There are environmental sounds in Elden Ring that change based on the time of day in ways that most players do not consciously track. The bird sounds in the morning are different from the cicada sounds in the afternoon, which are different from the absence of sound in the middle of the night. These transitions happen gradually enough that players in extended sessions sometimes describe noticing the world has changed around them. The cricket and insect sounds that emerge at specific evening hours in Limgrave are described by a sound designer from the development team as having been recorded from actual insects and processed to match the scale of the game world. Whether this is true or a promotional detail is not something that affects the result, which is that the soundscape feels genuinely natural. There is a location in Limgrave, a small clearing in the forest, where the combination of the ambient sound design, the visual of the Erd tree in the distance, and the quality of the light at a specific time of day creates a moment that multiple players have independently described as feeling like being in the middle of something much larger than a game. This kind of response appears to have been considered an intended outcome by the developers. The Elden Ring sound team created unique ambiences for each major region that reflect the cultural and environmental character of that region. Caelid's ambience includes a persistent, low-frequency hum that has been described as feeling like a living thing, matching the lore that the scarlet rot is a form of life rather than merely decay. Liurnia's ambience uses water sounds and wind that changes pitch depending on the open elevation of the area. The sound when standing in open water is different from the sound when standing in ruins near water. and both are different from the sound of the high cliffs above the lake. The variation creates the impression that the lake and its environment are responsive to your position within them. There is a ruin in Liurnia that, when you stand at its center, produces a resonance effect, where specific sounds from different directions combine into a tone that does not match any individual source. Players who identified this location and returned to it reported it as something worth seeking out for the experience, rather than for any reward it provides. The round table holds music changes slightly, depending on how far you have progressed in the game. Early visits have a version of the ambience that is slightly warmer, later visits are slightly cooler. The change is subtle enough that it requires comparison between recordings to confirm, but players who noticed it independently have described the later hold as feeling slightly less safe. There is a grace site near the Limgrave coast, called the Seaside Ruins, that is close enough to the water to hear the ocean clearly when resting. This is one of the only sites of grace with a distinct natural sound background that changes the feeling of resting there compared to other graces. Players who have rested there describe it as one of the more peaceful grace sites in the game. The sound of resting at a grace site, the gentle chime and warmth that fills the audio when you do, is one of the most consistent sounds in the game. After many hours, it becomes associated with safety and recovery in a way that the game did not need to train you to feel. The Pavlovian quality of this sound design appears to have been considered. There is an enemy called the Vulgar Militant that appears in certain dungeons and uses a ranged flail attack. Its description says it is a warrior from a faction that predates the Golden Order and that has been operating in the margins of society throughout the current age. The faction's goals are described as purely material. They want resources and territory, without any religious or ideological component, which is unusual in a game where almost everything has divine significance. The troll enemies found in Stormvale Castle and other locations are described as having once been builders rather than warriors. Their size made them useful for construction, and many of the largest stone structures in the lands between are implied to have been built with troll labour. The trolls serving as guards or opponents now are a different role from their historical one. There is a troll in the Altus Plateau who is carrying a cage on its back. Inside the cage is a small enemy, a finger maiden. The finger maiden attacks you from inside the cage if you get close to the troll. To attack the troll safely, you must deal with the maiden while also avoiding the troll. This combination is described in design discussions as an example of the game creating unexpected synergies between enemies that add to the world's coherence. The finger maidens in general are associated with the two fingers and with providing guidance to Tarnished. Your character begins the game without a finger maiden, which is why Vari calls you maidenless. Finding Malenia essentially replaces the maiden function, but through a different and less institutional mechanism. There is a detail about the finger maidens that suggests they are chosen from among a specific type of person based on their sensitivity to grace. The selection process is described briefly in an item description and implies an organization responsible for maintaining a supply of maidens for Tarnished. This organization is not further described. The giant fingers described in lore as having been cut off and scattered are objects that sometimes appear as the physical bases of important structures. The finger ruin pillars, visible near the Erd tree's base, are described as the remains of an enormous hand that once held the Elden Ring. The scale of a hand large enough for those ruins suggests an entity of size beyond any creature shown in the game. There is a description of the finger ruins that notes the fingers point upward, as though still reaching, still maintaining the position they held when they grasped something. This detail makes the ruins feel less like historical artifacts and more like a posture that is still in progress, interrupted rather than completed. The Elden Ring's final boss sequence, taking you through Radagon and then the Elden Beast, is structured as a two-part argument. Radagon represents the attempt to repair and maintain the current order. The Elden Beast represents the order itself as a cosmic force. Defeating both is a rejection of both the attempt and the system behind it. The Elden Beast's opening move in the fight is to create a golden seal in the shape of the Elden Ring itself, and then shatter it, which mirrors the event that started everything. In fighting you, It reenacts the game's central trauma, whether this is a threat or a display, or simply the way it knows how to fight, is not indicated. There is a specific window in the Elden Beast fight where, if you position yourself correctly relative to the boss, the Erd tree is visible in the background through the white void. This view is available for only a few frames at a specific point in the fight's camera cycle. Players who noticed it describe it as a moment of unexpected beauty in one of the most intense encounters in the game. The ending you achieve after defeating the Elden Beast is presented immediately, without a loading screen or break. The transition from combat to cutscene is seamless. This choice means that your last action in the fight is directly followed by your first action in the ending, creating a continuity between what you did and what results from it. The different ending cutscenes share the same location but have different qualities of light. The Age of Stars ending has cooler, bluer light. The Golden Order Restoration ending has warm, golden light. The Frenzied Flame ending has an amber light that is the same color as the flame itself. The lighting design of the endings expresses their ideology without exposition. There is a specific sound that plays during the Age of Stars ending that does not appear anywhere else in the game. Players have described it as resembling the sound from the Siofa River underground sky. The stars above the Eternal City, reproduced now in an open sky above a transformed world. Whether this correspondence is intentional has not been confirmed. The title card that appears at the end of each ending uses different music. The basic Restoration ending uses a reprise of the main theme. Ranni's ending uses a new piece. The Frenzied Flame ending uses a variation of the Three Fingers theme. Each title card is a different final statement on what the game was about. There is a message that appears after all credits have rolled on a first completion that is not present on subsequent completions. It is brief and direct, addressed to the player rather than to the tarnished, and exists outside the fiction of the game's world. Players who saw it and then started a new game found it was gone. Whether this was intentional or a technical issue has not been clarified. The New Game Plus mode in Elden Ring is called New Journey. The choice of the word journey over game expresses a specific intent. You are not resetting. You are beginning again, with what you carried in a world that remembers what it was but presents itself as new. This is consistent with the Tarnished's relationship to cycles of death and return throughout the game. In New Game Plus, certain item descriptions read slightly differently, not because the text changes, but because the player's understanding of what the item's reference has changed. The lore remains the same, the reader has changed. This is a quality of the writing's depth rather than a technical feature. There is a detail about the overworld tree stumps found throughout the lands between that has been noted by several players. The stumps are oriented in a consistent direction relative to the Erd tree, suggesting that whatever caused the trees to fall came from the Erd tree's direction. This is not stated anywhere. It is visible only if you look at multiple stumps and compare their orientation. The direction the Erd tree's light falls in overworld areas is consistent with a single light source at the Erd tree's location. This means the shadows cast by trees, ruins, and terrain in Limgrave and the Altus Plateau all point away from the Erd tree in a geographically accurate way. This level of detail in the directional lighting suggests either an extremely precise lighting system or deliberate placement. There are specific times of day when the Erd tree appears to pulse slightly, a visual shimmer that lasts only a moment. Players who were looking at it at the right time and noticed the shimmer have described it as resembling a breath. The frequency of the shimmer, if it is consistent, has not been formally documented. There is a note found in the Altus Plateau near a sorcerer's camp that describes the author's attempt to find a way to cure the crystallization condition. The note is interrupted and does not finish. The sorcerer in the nearby tent has begun to crystallize. Whether the note was interrupted by the crystallization or by something else is not answered. The Crystallian boss, called the Crystallian Trio, 3 separate Crystallians fought simultaneously in a specific dungeon, is considered one of the more frustrating fights in the game due to the combination of their damage resistance and the crowded arena. But players who understand the blunt damage mechanic and come prepared find the fight to be one of the most straightforward optional challenges. There is a crystallian in a specific location who has partially fused with the stone wall behind it. Whether it grew into the wall over time or was always partially embedded is not addressed. Its item lore does not mention it. It exists as an environmental detail, suggesting that the crystallization process has no clear endpoint. The map item descriptions, which explain what each region contains when you find the map fragment for that region, are written in a voice that is different from the item descriptions of equipment and consumables. They read as official documentation, possibly travel guides or military assessments, suggesting a specific function in the world before everything fell apart. There is a region of the map that lacks the usual color variation, appearing more uniform than adjacent areas. This visual uniformity corresponds to an area that was apparently wiped by a single event that leveled the existing environment. The lack of variation reflects the lack of history in that space. The border between Limgrave and Caelid is one of the most visually dramatic transitions in an open-world game. There is a specific point crossing a bridge or descending a specific path where the lush green of Limgrave gives way immediately to the blighted orange-red of Caelid. The transition is not gradual, it is a line. This reflects the law that the rot spread was a specific event with a specific boundary rather than a gradual contamination. There is a merchant on the border of these two regions who has set up his camp precisely at the transition point. His dialogue acknowledges the contrast without describing it as strange. He has been there long enough to accept it as simply the way the world is at that location. The dragon of the Eternal City, found in the Nokron area, is called Dragonkin Soldier of Nokstella, and is one of several bosses that appears in two locations across the game. The version in Nokron is in a different form than the version in the Ainsel River. The difference between the forms suggests something happened to these entities between the two encounters. There is a specific room in Nokron that appears to be a nursery. The scale of the furniture is small, smaller than what the Albinauric or human NPCs would use, suggesting inhabitants of a different scale. The items found within the room are described as belonging to children. Whether the children of Nokstella were different in size from the adults is not addressed. The silver tears that make up many enemies in the underground areas are described as mimicking life without being life, taking on the shapes of other creatures as a form of predation. The silver tear that takes the most elaborate form is the mimic tear boss, which copies the player's equipment and appearance at the start of the fight, and then fights the player using their own build. The mimic tier boss is one of the most philosophically interesting fights in the game, not because of the lore, but because of what it represents mechanically. You are fighting a perfect copy of yourself. The fight is a stress test of your build, a direct question about whether the equipment and spells you have chosen are actually as effective as you believe. Players who have overcommitted to a single strategy are punished by the mimic exploiting that strategy's weaknesses. There is an item called the larval tear that allows you to respec your character when given to Ranala. The item is described as containing the seed of another life, a silver tear that has not yet taken a fixed form. The act of giving this to Ranala so she can reshape your character is described in the item's lore as participating in a tradition of transformation that predates the Erd Tree's civilization. There are a limited number of larval tears in each playthrough, which means respecs are limited. This creates a situation where the decision to respec is weighted by scarcity, which is a design choice that makes character building feel consequential even after the initial choice has been made. The Mimic Tear Summon, the Spirit Ash version of the Mimic Tear boss, copies your equipment at the moment of summoning and fights alongside you as a duplicate of yourself. Players who discovered this and chose outfits specifically to give the Mimic optimized gear have described the result as the closest the game comes to feeling like you have a partner. There is a detail about the Mimic Tear Summon that was changed after launch. In the game's initial release, the Mimic copied your flask charges as well, allowing it to heal itself. This was patched to remove the healing, and the change was one of the most discussed balance updates in the game's first weeks. Players who used the healing Mimic describe it as a qualitatively different experience from the patched version. There is an enemy in the Eternal Cities that takes the form of a pile of silver liquid before resolving into a humanoid shape. when approached. Watching this transformation before the enemy locks into its hostile form is one of the more unsettling moments in those areas, because the period of observation feels like witnessing something that was not meant to be seen. The ancestral follower enemies in the underground areas are tall, antlered beings described as worshippers of the ancestor spirit. They carry bows and are found in areas adjacent to the ancestor spirit's domain, moving with a slowness that suggests they are performing something ritualistic rather than patrolling functionally. There is an ancestral follower who is found kneeling and not moving when first encountered. It has no health bar visible until attacked, which has led several players to initially attempt to interact with it as though it were an NPC. The moment it becomes hostile and stands is described by players who experienced it as one of the more startling encounters in the underground areas. The root systems visible throughout the underground areas belong to the Erd tree above, extending down through the rock over enormous distances. Near the deepest underground areas, the roots are enormous, as wide as corridors, and appear to have been growing here for so long that the surrounding stone has shaped itself around them. The Erd tree's roots in the deepest areas have a different coloration from the roots visible higher up, darker, more amber, suggesting that the parts that have been underground the longest have been changed by what they are adjacent to, specifically Godwin's spreading body. The roots have been in contact with both the Erd tree above and the Death Prince below for a very long time. There is a room in the deep root depths where a root has grown through a wall and then through the room and out the other side without any adjustment to the walls, which have simply accepted the root's passage. The room still functions as a room. The root simply passes through it. It has the quality of something old enough to be considered part of the architecture. The Elden Ring's approach to scale across its different regions is one of its most consistently impressive technical achievements. Moving from Limgrave to the mountaintops and then descending into the underground cities represents an enormous range of elevation and environmental type that are all presented without any loading between them. Only the transitions of paths and elevators. There is a moment near the top of the mountaintops of the giants where, looking back in the direction of Limgrave, you can see the outline of the land masses you have travelled across as a continuous geography. This view makes the scale of the journey legible in a way that the individual regions cannot. Players who find this vantage point often pause there. The legacy dungeon of Farum Azula, the crumbling city that exists outside of time, contains one of the most vertically complex environments in the game. Platforms extend above and below each other to a degree that disorients players trying to build a mental map of the space. This is intentional, reflecting the temporal instability that the lore describes. There is a specific position in Farum Azula from which you can see 3 separate elevations of the dungeon simultaneously, each containing different enemies and different architectural details. This view, while available for only a moment during navigation, gives an impression of the space's layered history in a way that individual exploration cannot. The Beastmen enemies in Farum Azula are described as former servants of Malekith, who have been transformed by the temporal instability of the city. Their humanoid form has shifted towards something more feral, but their equipment, the weapons they carry, are still recognizable as belonging to a formal warrior tradition. The gap between their equipment and their behavior tells a story about deterioration. There is a sleeping beastman in a specific chamber in Farum Azula, who breathes with a sound that echoes in the chamber. He is enormous. Waking him causes an immediate and aggressive response. Players who observed his sleep before waking him have noted the domestic quality of the sound, the rhythm of breathing, in a space otherwise defined by combat. The Dragon Lord Placidusac's arena, accessed by lying in the specific spot in Farum Azula, is visible from certain positions before you trigger the transition. It is a golden expanse below a higher section of the dungeon. Players who look down at it before understanding what it was describe it as one of the game's more evocative environmental mysteries, an enormous golden space with no apparent access, no enemies visible from above, just a flat golden floor and distant ruins. The transition into the Placidusac's arena, triggered by lying down, happens with a fade to dark and then a slow fade in that reveals the space and stages. The reveal is timed to let you understand the scale of the arena before Placidus Sax becomes visible. This sequencing is deliberate and creates a moment of environmental awe before the awe of the boss itself. The two severed heads that Placidus Sax still has, the empty neck sockets, from which two other heads are described as having been lost, are visible during the fight. The wound is old enough to be scarred over, which suggests Placidus Sax has been fighting and living with this injury for an enormously long time. The absence is part of its appearance, rather than a recent damage. There is a specific lightning attack that Placidus Sax uses that requires the player to run perpendicular to its approach. Players who have fought it many times describe learning this attack's timing as a moment of alignment between their instinct and the game's physics, a moment where they stopped thinking and started responding in the right way. After defeating Placidus Sax, the area remains accessible and the golden floor of the arena continues to glow. Returning to the arena after the fight reveals nothing new, but the space, now empty of the ancient creature that filled it, has a quality that several players describe as significant in the absence rather than the presence. There is a weapon called the Dragon King's Cragblade that can only be obtained from Placidus Sax's remembrance. It is one of the few weapons in the game associated with a boss who predates the Erdtree's civilization. Its description speaks of a power that existed before the age of the Elden Ring, which places it in a category of artifact that does not fit the normal taxonomy of the game's divine hierarchy. The item, called Remembrance of the Dragon Lord, describes Placidus Sax's waiting as something that endured beyond the god that it was waiting for. This is the core of the character's pathos. The god left, everything else ended. Placidus Sax is still there, in the time that exists outside of time, and it has not stopped waiting. The word Dragon Lord, used to describe Placidus Sax's title, is different from the word used for the dragons that serve the Golden Order. Those dragons are described using different terminology that implies a relationship of service. Dragon Lord implies command and sovereignty, the title of someone who rules other dragons, rather than serving something above them. There are items in the game that drop from enemies and are described as having been important to the enemy before they became what they are now. A soldier's medal, a scholar's bookmark, a knight's promise ring. These items are never integral to any quest line. They exist purely to suggest a life that the enemy was living before whatever transformed them. The promise ring, mentioned in an item description found near a hostile knight in the Altus Plateau, is described as a ring exchanged between two people in a promise of return. The description does not say whether the knight who carried it was the giver or the receiver of the promise. It does not say whether the other person survived. There is an item called the Seedbed Curse that you find in a disturbing location, and that is related to the Dung Eater's quest line. Its description is brief and clinical in a way that makes the content more unsettling rather than less. Collecting multiple of these items is required to progress his quest line, and each one must be found in a specific hidden location. The locations where Seedbed Curses are found are spread across different regions, which means that whatever the Dung Eater did, he did it in many places. The geographic spread implies a significant passage of time and a specific kind of dedication. The items do not describe what was done to create them. The description focuses on what they are rather than how they were made. There is a hidden passage in the Round Table Hold that is accessible only after a specific sequence of events. The passage leads to a room that is not visible on any map of the Hold. The room contains something that is described in item lore as having always been there, suggesting that the Hold was built around it, or the room was built separately and connected to the Hold as an afterthought. The smithing stone items used to upgrade weapons are described in their lore as containing the residue of divine power preserved in physical form. The higher tier stones, the somber smithing stones used for special weapons, contain a specifically ancient form of this residue, described as predating the current age's methods of weapon making. There is a specific somber smithing stone that can only be found in a location that requires defeating a specific boss to access. The stone's item description describes it as having been set aside for a specific weapon that was never made. It was a component for a project that was interrupted. What the weapon would have been is not described. The ancient dragon smithing stones, at the highest tier of upgrade material, are described as containing the power of the ancient dragons directly. Using one to upgrade a weapon is described as an act that changes the weapon's relationship to divine power in a way that the lower tier stones do not achieve. The blacksmithing equipment visible in Hugh's workspace at the round table hold includes tools that, if examined by someone with knowledge of historical blacksmithing, appear to be appropriate for the type of work described. The game's development process included research into historical weapon making to ensure the visual details were grounded. There is a weapon called the Ruin's Greatsword that requires enormous strength to use and deals both physical and magical damage. Its description says it was created from a piece of a meteorite that fell during the shattering, and that the meteorite carried a fragment of the Elden Ring's power within it. The weapon is thus described as a piece of the original catastrophe. The meteorite that fell in connection with the Radahn fight is described as having been contained within the gravitational field Radahn was maintaining. When Radahn was defeated, the field collapsed, and the meteorite fell. The impact crater is in Limgrave. The meteor carried something specific, which was travelling toward a specific destination when it was interrupted. The item found near the impact crater is called the Fingerslayer Blade, and its lore connects it to the Knight of the Black Knives. The blade's material is from a meteor. The Knight of the Black Knives used blades made from a fragment of the Rune of Death. The connection between cosmic material and the assassination suggests that whoever planned the assassination was working with forces that understood the relationship between stars and divine power. There is a hidden room in the Stormvale Castle area that contains a painting, a body, and a specific item placed beside the body carefully. The care with which the item was placed suggests that someone visited this room after the person died and arranged things. The visitor is not identified. The reason for the care is not explained. The 4 belfries in Liurnia are towers containing portals to other areas of the game. Each portal is activated with a specific imbued stone sword key. 2 of the portals take you to otherwise inaccessible areas that contain significant lore items. 1 portal takes you to the beginning of the game's tutorial area. 1 portal is sealed with no activation possible. The sealed portal has a description on its archway that suggests it once led somewhere significant. Players have speculated about its destination for as long as the game has been available. The destination has not been confirmed by any official source. The sealed portal remains one of the game's genuinely open mysteries. The portal to the tutorial area, the Cave of Knowledge, if taken from the belfries, places you at the end of the tutorial rather than the beginning. Exiting through the normal exit places you at the very start of Limgrave, where you began. This creates a loop from the end of the game back to its starting point that is geometrically and narratively significant. There is a whistle-like sound associated with the torrent mount that plays when you summon him and when you dismiss him. This sound is distinct from any other in the game and is described by several players as the sound they most associate with comfort in the game's world. The ability to summon Torrent is the game's primary mobility tool, and the sound of his arrival becomes associated with freedom of movement. Torrent's movement, sounds, the hooves on different surfaces, the breath, the body sounds of a large animal in motion, are described by the game's sound team as having been created to give the mount a weight and presence that distinguishes it from the player character's movement sounds. The contrast between the player running and Torrent running is clearly audible. There is a specific rock in the Altus Plateau that Torrent can jump to from a nearby lower surface, leading to an area that would otherwise require significantly longer travel. The jump is precise and can be missed, but players who discover it describe the access it provides as making a portion of the game feel uniquely navigable, as though the world contains shortcuts that reward attention to its geometry. The Torrent's spirit spring jumps are accompanied by a specific visual effect around the Torrent and player character that matches the colour associated with sites of grace, golden. This colour choice connects the mobility mechanic to the grace-related lore, suggesting that the spirit springs are related to the same divine energy as the grace sites. There is a location in the game where a spirit spring is positioned directly above a cliff that drops to a lower area. Players who discovered this could use the spring to launch into the air and then angle their descent to a landing point far below, bypassing a significant portion of travel. This is an interaction between a mechanic and geography that was not specifically designed, but also not prevented. The open-world design of Elden Ring is described by its directors as intentionally creating the possibility of unplanned interactions between mechanics and geography. The philosophy was that a world large enough and a set of mechanics coherent enough would produce emergent possibilities that neither the designers nor the players would anticipate. The Spirit Spring Cliff Drop is one example of this philosophy producing a result. There is a merchant in a well. Players who found him described the discovery as requiring enough curiosity to look down into a well they had no reason to expect to contain anything. He is there, at the bottom, selling his goods, completely unperturbed. His location is described in a comment from a staff member as having been placed specifically for players who look into wells. The items this merchant sells are all related to the underground areas of the game, specifically to the Siofra River. Whether his position at the bottom of a well was intended to mirror the way you access the underground from the surface is not confirmed, but the thematic resonance has been noted. There is a well in Stormvale Castle that is too narrow to enter, but that, if you look down, appears to go much deeper than expected. No item or enemy is visible at the bottom. There is a sound from the bottom that is distinct from the ambient sounds of the castle, but too ambiguous to identify. Players who recorded and amplified the sound have posted the results online and disagreed about what it resembles. The Dragon Communion Cathedral in Caelid is accessible from a coastal cliff by riding torrent along a specific narrow path. Players who found the path by accident described the discovery of the cathedral at the end of the path as one of the more rewarding moments of exploration in Caelid, which is otherwise one of the more oppressive regions in the game. The altar. Inside the Dragon Communion Cathedral is an older style of construction than most altars associated with the Erdtree's faith. It is described in item lore as having been adapted for the Dragon Communion purpose from an older religious practice, which is consistent with the idea that the dragon faith is older than the Erdtree's civilization. There is a corpse in the Dragon Communion Cathedral that is described in a nearby note as having been a visitor who came to exchange a dragon heart and died during the exchange. The note describes the exchange as a risky process, which is not reflected in the game's mechanic of simply trading the item. The lore implies the process has costs that the mechanic abstracted away. The giant turtle named Miriel, who keeps the Church of Vows, is described as having been given his current responsibilities during a time when the church was newly built and significant. He has been there since, which means he has lived through every age of the lands between that the game describes. He has knowledge of history that no human character could have, having been present for it. When asked about historical events, Miriel responds with the kind of patience and detail that comes from having been present rather than having read about something. He does not editorialize, he describes. This makes him one of the most reliable sources of information in the game, though also one of the most easily overlooked. There is a specific question you can ask Miriel that causes him to become briefly quiet before answering. The pause is not a loading delay, it is an animation. He appears to consider his words. The question that triggers this pause is about Radagon, and the pause appears to reflect the complexity of what Miriel knows about that subject. Miriel's item, the Lord's Prayer Book, which he gives you if you show him appropriate items, is described as having been copied by hand from a text that no longer exists. He copied it himself, long ago, as a way of preserving something he knew would otherwise be lost. The act of hand-copying a religious text as preservation is one of the more recognizably human things any character in the game does. The finger reader Enya at the Round Table Hold is the character who translates the two fingers' gestures and sells you items from boss remembrances. Her physical description emphasizes blindness and age. Her manner is calm and assured. She is one of the characters who seems most comfortable in the current state of things, which could reflect either wisdom or a specific kind of detachment. The remembrances she offers you the option of converting into items carry a weight in the transaction that her neutral presentation does not acknowledge. She is selling you something made from the memory of someone you killed. She presents this as a service. The absence of moral commentary from her is itself a kind of commentary. There is a moment late in the game where Enya offers you a remembrance and says something about the being you killed that is more personal than her usual transactional dialogue. The comment is brief and does not lead to further conversation, but it suggests that she knew the being when it was alive, or that she has been storing this observation for a specific moment. The husks who sit beside her are never explained beyond their description as former maidens. They react to bell bearings presented to them with a physical motion that suggests recognition, a slight forward lean, before returning to their stationary position. Whether this motion is coded as recognition or is simply part of their idle animation is not confirmed. There is a bell bearing for a type of item that most players find through normal exploration, but that can also be purchased through the husks once the corresponding bell bearing is delivered. The source of this bell bearing is an NPC whose location is easy to miss and whose death, when it occurs, is often one the player accidentally caused. Receiving their bell bearing from the husks and realizing what it implies is one of those retroactive revelations the game specializes in. The game's systems, taken together, create a specific experience of accumulation and loss. You accumulate runes, items, knowledge, relationships, and the world gradually loses people and places that were present at the beginning. The trajectory from abundance to scarcity in the NPC population of the Round Table Hold tracks a specific narrative of attrition that is felt even by players who are not consciously tracking the questlines. There is a chair at the Round Table Hold that is empty throughout the entire game. No NPC sits in it at any point. It is positioned in a way that suggests it was intended for someone specific. What that positioning implies about who was expected to sit there is something the game does not explain. The Hold's geography, the specific layout of its rooms and corridors, was apparently designed around its function as a gathering place for Tarnished. But the gathering that was intended never happened at the scale implied by the Hold's size. The building is too large for its population at any point in the game, which gives it the quality of an institution built for a possibility that did not fully materialize. There is a painting near the Hold's upper balcony that was presumably hung by whoever designed the space. Its subject matter is the Erd Tree, viewed from a distance. The choice to hang a painting of the Erd Tree in the Hold, rather than a depiction of the Hold itself, or its founders, places the Hold's identity in relationship to the Erd Tree, rather than as an independent institution. The game's overarching visual design repeatedly uses the Erd Tree as a reference point. Almost every environment was apparently designed with an eye to where the Erd Tree would appear in the player's field of view. The result is a world where the Erd Tree is never absent from the visual experience, even when it is in the far background, and where its position relative to the player's current location provides an unconscious spatial anchor. The Erd Tree's glow changes across the game's day-night cycle. At dawn, it is the first light source visible, brighter than the rising sun for a brief period. At night, it provides the only consistent light in areas without torches or lanterns. This makes it a navigational aid, as well as a visual constant, which connects the divine symbol to a practical function in a way that feels natural rather than symbolic. There is a moment in the game, during a specific weather event, when clouds pass between the player and the Erd Tree in a way that causes the Erd Tree's light to project rays above and below the cloud. This phenomenon, a crepuscular ray effect visible from miles away, is created by the same lighting system that handles all weather in the game, but creates a result of unusual visual power when it occurs near the Erd Tree. Players who saw this for the first time while not in combat, while simply riding through the Altus Plateau or standing at a high point in Limgrave, have described it as a moment that made the game world feel real in a way that no amount of enemy encounter or boss fight achieves. The game was simply presenting a sky, and the sky was extraordinary. The Elden Ring's visual and environmental design team worked with a set of color palettes for each region that were designed to feel emotionally distinct from each other. Limgrave is warm and green. Caelid is hot and orange-red. Liurnia is cool and blue-grey. The mountain tops are white and colourless. These palettes were not accidents. They were deliberate emotional assignments for each region. Crossing from one region to another means crossing from one emotional register to another. Players who spent long periods in Caelid before returning to Limgrave have described the return as physically relieving, a response to colour that the palette design appears to have intended. There is a specific item called the Arena's Letter that exists only to be carried from one character to another. It has no other function. Its item description describes the letter's content as a plea written by someone who loved the person she was writing to and was afraid she would never see him again. The description is the most emotionally direct piece of writing in a game that generally prefers indirection. The fate of the letter, and of Irina, and of Edgar, is one of the cleaner tragic arcs in the game, precisely because it is short. Players who follow it from beginning to end spend perhaps 20 minutes of the game's total time with these characters. The arc resolves in a way that is credible and bleak without being gratuitous, and then the game continues without acknowledging that it happened. There are 3 sisters in the game's lore: Malenia, Ranni, and a third who is referred to in some item descriptions but not named consistently. The existence of a third sister has been a subject of community analysis since the game's release. Some readings suggest the third is Rykard's lineage line completing a pattern. Others identify a specific unnamed character who fits the pattern. The resolution of this question, if there is one, lies in item descriptions that are ambiguous enough to support multiple interpretations. The game does not acknowledge the ambiguity. The information is presented as though its meaning is clear, leaving the interpretation to the player. There is a small bird near the start of the game, in the beach area of Limgrave, that sits on a post above the water. It is not hostile and cannot be interacted with. It is simply a bird on a post. Players who visited this bird repeatedly across their first playthrough have reported that it became a ritual checkpoint, a place to return to between significant events, and that its consistency across the chaos of the game was something they found grounding. The game's open-world design allows for this kind of personalization of space. Because nothing compels the player to move in a specific direction, the spaces they choose to return to voluntarily become significant in a way that a linear game cannot produce. The bird on the post has no designed significance. Its significance is entirely created by the player who chose to return. There is a flower in the consecrated snowfield that blooms in a specific way only during specific weather conditions. The bloom reveals an item that cannot be found when the conditions are not met. Players who found the item accidentally while exploring during those conditions were unable to replicate the discovery until they understood the trigger. The trigger is weather, which occurs on the game's internal schedule without any player influence. The relationship between environmental conditions and item availability in certain areas of the game creates a situation where the world itself determines the timing of the player's discoveries. This is different from a triggered event or a questline step. It is simply the world behaving according to its own rhythms and making its secrets available when those rhythms align. There is a sound that the wind makes in the mountaintops of the giants that several players have described as resembling a voice. The sound is created by the game's wind simulation, interacting with the specific geometry of that region's terrain. Whether the resemblance to voice is intentional, produced by tuning the wind simulation to create that effect, or incidental, is something the development team has not addressed. The silence that follows this wind sound, the moment after the gust passes and before the next one begins, has a quality of attention. As though something has paused, several players have described sitting still on their mount in that silence and feeling the specific weight of a world that is very old and very empty. There is a small memorial in the mountaintops, visible only from a specific angle and easy to miss in the snow, that marks a place where something significant happened. The marking is not accompanied by any item. There is no enemy nearby. It is simply a place that was marked by someone, for reasons that the game does not explain, in a location that most players pass without noticing. The decision to include things like this, things that have no mechanical function and no narrative exposition, and no reward, reflects a specific philosophy about what a game world should be. The world should contain more than the player needs. It should have a margin of the undiscovered that is not a reward for effort, but simply part of existing as a world. Elden Ring, as a world, feels inhabited in the past tense. The things you find were placed by people who are no longer present. The routes you travel were established by civilizations that are gone. The music that plays in the grace sites sounds like something that remembers what was here before you arrived. And the game, taken as a whole, creates the impression of a world that existed fully before you entered it and will continue in some altered form after you leave it. There is a final image that some players describe from moments near the end of the game, looking back from the steps of the Erd Tree at the land they have crossed. The mountain tops visible in the far distance, Caelid's red glow on the horizon, the green of Limgrave impossibly far away. Everything traversed, everything lost, everything changed visible simultaneously from a single point. The image is not a cutscene. It is not a designed moment. It is simply the geometry of the world, visible from that elevation, available to anyone who turns around and looks before entering the final confrontation. The game does not ask you to look. It simply makes the option available. The way it makes all options available, without instruction, waiting to see if you will find it.